Hey, so we're here with another episode, and we're going to be talking about data and things related to data. We got Steve, we got Craig, and well, there's all
And
sorts of
data.
great data-rific stuff to talk about. So I'm just going to let Craig drop some knowledge. So go for it, my man.
Okay. So here's a fun little factoid just jump right into. We may have had an election recently.
I
Those were
hear
state
that the
elections, mind you.
media, I hear that Fox News and CNN are the ones that certify electors. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
that's not.
Yes, it is. It is
Wait,
totally
wait.
true.
Oh,
Fox
They
wait,
News
hold
has
on.
all the
I'm getting
power.
conflicting information here. One of you is saying that it's true that the
Yep,
media is the
it's
sole
true.
proprietor of electorship
so
in America, and one of you is saying it's not. So
so
Well,
clear
I
so
that
the
mean,
way
for
the
me.
process
they did
goes.
sit there and give Arizona to Biden like 4 days before the actual vote totals came in. But
Well, let's go ahead and follow in on that one. What does it mean to actually to have your electors allocated? What is required for that? Well, your certified vote total is required, and the election result certification dates are actually known. Uh, so
Now,
one
those have
state so
all
far,
already happened, right? Those happened back in September, right?
one state, November 5th,
Oh,
Delaware.
no. Oh,
Every other state,
November.
not yet.
Wait, that's after the election. How can that happen? I thought everything was certified before the election.
Only in the minds of conspiracy theorists.
Oh, okay, okay.
So California, by the way, is not even certifying their election vote totals, their results until December 11th, which is the last fucking day you can,
Oh, wow.
uh,
And
because
now
they
I'd
decided to do the
heard
blanket
something about
mail-in ballot bullshit.
I'd heard something about there are still cities and counties in New York that haven't even finished their vote count. That probably doesn't
Well,
matter.
New York's not certifying their vote totals until December 7th, so they got plenty of time. They got a whole freaking month minus a day here.
yeah, but it's New York.
Yeah. So I expect this shit to happen kind of snappy. You know what I'm talking about?
My
Tammany
vote
Hall
doesn't
gang.
matter, nor does anybody else's in the entire
Right.
state of New York.
Androlf Cuomo's vote's the only one that matters.
That's exactly right.
Comrade Commissar Cuomo. May his heart
Oh,
always
It's
be
the same
Cuomo.
shit.
west.
Same shit, different horseshoe. You know. So like, yeah, the next round of them is November 10th. So it's not even tomorrow that any vote totals are going to be certified. No, so their election results
And
need to be certified in order for the state governments to apportion the electors to the candidates for the electoral college.
before that happens, there are going to be court cases.
Right.
And I don't see any way that there's not going to be court cases.
Now,
We're talking
supposing
about a couple thousand votes per state with some
Yeah.
actual pretty concerning data stuff coming in.
So supposing that the election results are certified, even there's still room until the actual electoral college convenes on December 14th. There's still room to adjust these totals even after they're certified. You have to have them
Now let me
recertified
just
after say
break
an
right
audit.
in here and ask you what this electoral college is. It sounds like it's racist.
It's incredibly racist. You know, it's like 3/5 compromise, except it's not.
Wow.
Oh my god.
So the electoral college is the only national vote we have in this country from the population. And that's what makes it a fucking republic, you know, is that there's
Now, I
multiple
was
levels
told
of
that
this.
this is a
First off,
democracy,
people
not a
miss
republic.
and don't understand what the electoral college is, right? So they sit there and you see the people who want to talk about the popular vote, and anybody who wants to talk about the popular vote
never
is
mattered.
a fucking moron. Right?
Never mattered once in the country.
The structure of the government is that you have your congressional representative, and that is your representative who you're supposed to elect. Originally, the states had two representatives, and that was what your senators were. They would basically negotiate on behalf of the states whatever your congressional representatives, which represented the people, kicked up to them. We switched that over to the popular vote, which was probably a really stupid idea, but that's the way it worked out. When you start talking about the president, you have to balance the individual state interests with the individual population interests, because realistically, people are fucking stupid. And so what ended up happening is they came with a population weighted state average, and that's what the electoral college is. So even if you get these mega cities in one state that vote one way, it means that they're not going to be ruling over the middle of the country, which has an entirely different set of economical problems.
Keep in mind, we're the United States, not the United San Francisco and New York City, all right?
I thought.
It's the United 50 states, not the United
Listen,
7
listen,
cities.
motherfucker. As a New Yorker, I can say that anything outside of New York and LA
Well, it
is a
doesn't matter.
flyover state.
Yeah, okay. You say that until America's wang acts up again, then you go, "Oh, Florida man."
Yeah. No. Florida only matters A, for the election, and B, so that we have a place to put our old people.
Well, we cater to them with all the crazy people.
Well, I mean, you know what?
Which
You're
is why
God's
you
waiting
think-
room. So
Which is it's why you think that the elderly are actually slowly going crazy. What's happening in reality is that their attendants are making them crazy. They come in with things like, "By the way, I just hugged that gator over there." They go, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" I'm going back into my room. Where's the canasta?
Florida.
No, so like the actual electors are not apportioned until at least the date at which election results are certified. The last day to do that is the 11th. The day of the actual electoral college convention, which is where the election happens, is the 14th. After that, it's still possible that a 12th Amendment process takes over. If they don't get a majority for president, then they actually do two elections in the electoral college. They do an election for the president, election for vice president. It used to be that the runner-up for president got selected for vice president, and they changed it up a little bit so that
Which
there's
is
two elections.
actually another thing that was a terrible mistake.
I thought it was a great idea for them when they did that, because at least then you had a different opinion that was involved
Yes.
instead of a puppet below you that ran the Senate.
I mean, so let's be entirely honest. In reality, it doesn't matter much. Realistically speaking, Biden is probably going to end up getting the nomination because that's where the chips fall.
Right.
There is still a path for Trump, but it's going to be basically sitting there and going through and digging through the actual data and proving election fraud.
Now here's the fun bit. So to wrap up the 12th Amendment shit, if it does go that way, what most people know about the 12th Amendment is that the House chooses the president. What they probably forget after their middle school or high school is that each state gets a vote, not each representative. Each state's delegation gets a vote. So there's 50 votes. Yep. So effectively in this election, it would be whoever has the most states. And in 1800, Jefferson won after 36 rounds of voting because he had to win by a 2/3 majority.
Right.
So I was actually hoping earlier was that we'd see Trump like in the middle of March or July next year after freaking tens of rounds, more than Jefferson ever ended up having to deal with, finally winning, and just the gnashing and shrieking that would go on through the end of next year.
Well, I mean, so in terms of what Trump can
that
do
won't
at
happen.
This point, it's going to be a legal battle, right? And basically what he's going to have to prove is he's going to have to prove fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that is the real core thing. I mean, you listen to like Tim Pool, and Tim Pool says, "Oh, it's got to be impropriety," blah blah blah. No, he legitimately is going to have to prove fraud. He's going to have to prove that the election in the key swing states that ended up going to Biden either did not conform to the actual rules of the election as set forth originally. And that's one of these arguments where you sit there and you say, hey, the election is one day that's set by the, whatever, it's on this day, and everybody has to get their votes in by that day, and anything that comes in late.
Here's the thing, there's 51 different jurisdictions for that. So 50 states plus DC. And it's a state's responsibility to determine how they're going to run their own elections.
Right, exactly.
Because these are state-level elections, even though it's all on the same day by federal precedent.
So at the end of the day, he's going to have to essentially prove that, and it's going to be very difficult. Sure. That being said, there's a lot of shady shit in this election.
There's some fuckery going on.
Shady fucking shit. Right?
So there's fuckery that happens every time around, but this time around there's some significant stuff, and there's also some stuff that's been brewing for a while that's kind of like at the breaking point for you should have fucking dealt with it by now.
Yeah. So what Craig and I are kind of referring to here is a couple different things. The surface figure is going to be when do you have to stop taking ballots? So you start taking a look at states like Georgia and Pennsylvania, and they're accepting ballots all the way up until like the 11th or the 12th of November.
Well, I think that one state we mentioned this actually in the stream on the other channel nobody should ever go look at. We mentioned that there was, just by highlighting over the map from the New York Times, there's like a couple of states that are accepting ballots, admittedly postmarked by Election Day, which is where I'm willing to finally accept a compromise, but willing to accept ballots from the mail service, a 2-day mail, by the way, on these things, so they should show up pretty quickly.
Yep.
Willing
You
to
would
accept
think. You would
ballots
think.
out like weeks,
Yeah.
like until the 21st.
Well,
Right.
I
So
hear they're even still getting
what
ballots
what
today.
you have as a legal path, right? You're going to have a legal path for disqualifying ballots that weren't received on election day, or stuff that's not postmarked by election day, which was one of the big things in Pennsylvania. Is they wanted to sit there and keep it open until
Yeah,
whenever.
then there's the one thing where, like, on the 4th, that guy who's now sworn in on an affidavit, etc.
Yeah.
That they were back. There's at least talk about backdating
And that's
ballots that they
the
found.
problem.
Yeah,
So,
which is
so
bullshit.
what you have is, even if we had that rule, and this is where the fraud stuff starts to come in, you'd have to basically prove that the postmaster or the USPS is backdating ballots so that they count for the election, which is no bueno, right? Like, that's
Which,
absolutely wrong.
as it stands right now, even with this affidavit, it stands as hearsay.
Right.
So you have to prove that there was physical evidence, not just there was a guy
Right.
talking about it.
And that's going to be really hard. Where I think they're going to have a little bit easier time is some of the other fuckery associated with dead voters, which has always been a running joke. But this year, it's pretty prevalent. So you look at, like, Pennsylvania, and I threw up a link to the database there.
Vote. She would have been
You can
really
sort
happy
that
to know she got a
database by
chance this
birth
year.
year, and it's got people who are registered all the way back to 1800.
Hold up, Evan was trying to talk.
Oh, I was just saying that I should check and see if my grandmother got a chance to vote. I mean, she was a really political type, and she'd be really pleased to know that she got a chance this year. I mean, she didn't in the last, it's been about 5 years, but I mean, it'd be nice if she got a chance this year.
Well,
rest her
it
soul.
appears that people all the way back to 1800 are voting in this election in Pennsylvania.
I'll have to go to the graveyard and put out a ballot in her honor.
Now, some of that stuff I'm sure is data error, but then there's some oddly specific birth dates that are in people that are very clearly like 120 plus years.
There's a list.
Well, actually, let me break in for a quick second on that. I've heard some really great news that the late great Chris Benoit actually was able to go out and throw a slammer on a ballot as well.
Why not Ben fucking Franklin at this point?
But yeah, so that I've.
Where's Washington's vote? Isn't he going to be represented?
Well, of course. And what was it? I thought I heard somebody said that MC Hammer was in there somewhere.
Oh yeah, that's well, if you had any hope of being monetized anywhere, that's gone.
Right.
Yeah, MC Hammer. I think he was watching the scorecard, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, with the 5G oxygen. Yeah.
But if you so Pennsylvania and Michigan both have identified like 10,000 plus people who have apparently voted based on the database, right?
So in Michigan, here's the thing with that's to be specific, so that we can just eliminate this as a complication at the very get-go here. There's something like 14,000 dead voters, and I say dead voters because apparently they fucking voted. That don't have a birth date that would be automatically generated in a database like 0101, 1900, 1901, or 1800. That's like 1932, shit like that. And with confirmed deceased records in the Social Security database. They're definitely dead.
They have a ballot that was mailed to them, returned back, and counted, or at least it appears.
Oh, it's so the way that the government database works for it, the public access to it, is it says received. So they acknowledge receipt of the envelope. What they do after that is not determined, or is not displayed on the website. Sure. So they say that they sent it out. They say they got it back.
It would be really funny if they actually listed who that person voted for. I
mean, that would breach public privacy issues.
I mean, Biden. You gotta admit, for all those people that
are
voting, Biden is obviously going to be their top favorite pick because he's the closest one to them.
Right.
No, fair point.
He's got one foot in the fucking ground already.
Yeah. So the other thing is I was making this point earlier with you. And Evan unfortunately wasn't on here to hear it. So we can just go ahead and actually extend this to an issue beyond January 20th or beyond whenever Biden probably gets in office. It's not that this has been happening recently or this happened just this year. This has been going on for decades. And if we assume, and so we can get to the excuses and how funny that is in a minute, but if we just assume that they throw out 100% of the votes that come in for a dead person, or from a dead person rather, and that they catch all of them. The fact remains that these dead people have been voting for decades, and people have not been thrown in jail for committing vote fraud. Because that is fraud.
Well, I mean, the funniest part was the Michigan governor came out and he turned around and said, "Well, yeah, the dead vote all the time, but it's not like we count them." And you're like, "What the fuck did you just say?"
Yeah, it started off as they don't do it, and then if you look at the PolitiFact bullshit article, which is completely contradictory, it's self-contradictory. Either the person voted and it got thrown out, and it did happen, or the Sun voted and it got counted. You can't have it both ways.
Right.
Well, there's quite a lot of people that they name their children after them and don't include a junior or the second, and then that child lives in the same household and makes the mistake of sending in their automatically.
They know who they're sending it to, and they say they correct the database when these things are brought up. And it's like all the shit that they said in the article is all self-contradictory, and it's complete bullshit.
The problem is again, even with that statement, right? It gets corrected when it gets brought up. Who's bringing it up, right? That's kind of the problem. And so you look at
when you go to the DMV or you go to Social Security or whatever, and they say, "I'm sorry, but per the voter roll record, you're dead."
You'd think so, but so the Michigan Department of State specifically said, "This is misinformation. Ballots of voters who have died are rejected in Michigan, even if the voter cast an absentee ballot and then died before Election Day." And the question is,
well, that part's definitely wrong.
Why are they getting ballots in the first place, right? Like
they don't ever want to purge the rolls because that would be racist or something.
If you take a look at like the Pennsylvania database that I linked, there are 147,694 people that are 85 years and older who voted, and there's only a handful of people that are up to 85 that are in that state. So I mean, like that's kind of the thing is you start digging through it, and it looks like a whole bunch of dead people voted. There could be data errors, but they're going to have to explain it. At 146,694, only a very small portion of those people would have had to vote Democrat for the totals to have flipped away from Biden.
That being said, too, as I'm looking at something here, it says local clerks can correct the issue when it is brought to their attention.
That would be correct.
So that would require someone bringing it to their attention. Right. Or am I being a racist and bringing that up?
I mean, that might be right. Here's a way to bring it to their attention. Did you throw the ballot out?
Well, I think bringing it to their attention, that's going to be what the Trump lawsuits are all about. Right? It's going to be literally saying, "Hey, look at all these dead people who voted in your election." They're going to, "Oops, sorry about that.
Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Allow me to correct the number." Fucking idiot.
We have a no zombie policy. It's very strict, I assure you.
Well, they have a one zombie policy because they're all for God.
Oh my God. So you
Where's
look at
Jesus? He's probably got a vote or two in there too.
You look at Pennsylvania and Michigan, and that's where a lot of those legal challenges are. Another set of legal challenges is going to be people who voted in these swing states that don't live in the swing states anymore.
Oh, you mean in Nevada?
In Nevada's
where there was 3,000 plus votes.
But
where they did that.
I have never, and I repeat, never, ever, ever lived in Florida. My phone number has a New Hampshire area code. I live in New York, as I've mentioned a couple times, in the 518 area code region, which is like all of the northern country there.
Right.
And I received a request to send in a mail-in ballot to Florida. So,
wow.
So, and that I'm not. That's not a joke. That's
here's my question. Was it from Miami?
It was not. It was some sort of like vote results thing. I don't know how they got my information.
They might have just been asking for who you voted for.
No, they were actually sitting there and asking me to request an absentee mail-in ballot.
Oh, okay. So they wanted. Okay, that was definitely an activist organization then.
And they were going to assist me. Yeah.
So that's an activist org. So that would have gotten caught. So Florida has a very good and robust absentee ballot system.
It does.
A couple of the localities I think did mass mail-in. Probably Miami, some parts of Miami, the Miami-Dade County. But basically in Florida, it's a no excuse absentee ballot system. So we've never had we wouldn't do like a mail-in ballot system here because you just do the online application and there's a full handshake and they know who the fuck you are.
Yep.
And there's chain of custody involved.
Yep.
Unlike, say, Nevada, California, and a couple other states where they just decided to shotgun everybody. And as a consequence, now, like I said, it's not gonna affect really. I don't think the total. Well, it's not gonna affect who the electors go to. I think the spread is larger than 3,000. But there was like at least 3,000 odd people in Nevada who are not there anymore who voted there, as far as I can tell.
Well, it was the Trump campaign. The official mission was 3,062 people that they found in the national database for having moved from Nevada that no longer live there that technically voted in Nevada. So I'm sure that legal challenge will go through.
So that's the number I was talking about then.
Yeah. So and when you look at the vote count, it wouldn't. That 3,000 wouldn't make a difference.
It'll narrow it a little bit, but really
it would narrow it a little bit. But like that's 629 to 664. So they need to come up with almost 30,000 votes, and they've got 3,000.
Under a recount, you might expect to get anywhere between, say, a couple hundred votes difference to as many as a few thousand votes difference. You're probably not going to get more than 10,000 votes difference, although it's possible. You're probably not going to get that kind of a margin.
No. And I mean,
and keep in mind the Bush Gore the Bush Gore Florida vote was decided by 537 votes.
Yes,
that's how Bush got Florida. So it is possible that some of these.
Not only that, actually, let me just hop in here and say it took 37 days to decide the hanging chads issue. We are at day 4.
They also went straight to Supreme Court. Because Gore wanted to only do recounts in places where it would advantage him, because he's a prick.
Funny that.
And then that course didn't work. You know, sad day for him.
Well, and I mean, I could see them recounting Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is going to have some challenges associated with when ballots are received. And it could easily be a case where they knock off 200, 300,000 ballots that were received after Election Day. Right, or weren't postmarked properly, or anything like that.
Or we're brought to the fucking counting place at 4 a.m. well past the time when it's supposed to happen.
Right, exactly. So, and that's a separate issue. So I'll dive into that in a moment. So like Pennsylvania could probably easily swing Trump, and that would knock Joe Biden off of his nice little comfortable 290 perch, and bring him down to 270. And then all they'd need to do is sit there and get something like Georgia, which is only like 10,000 votes, or Arizona, which is only 20,000 votes, or throw Michigan and Wisconsin into a recount, and you could feasibly get there.
You see, you've just given me like hope for my 12th Amendment scenario actually happening. If they do a recount in Nebraska or Maine and they find that one of those two gets to flip, and they can just bring it down to 269.
Well, and that's kind of the thing, right? Pennsylvania's the big horse there, and they're really, like, when you consider how many people voted. It's what 6.6 million people voted in Pennsylvania, and it's a spread of less than 40,000. So there is actual ground there, and they did some funky stuff with who get what ballots get counted versus what doesn't, and that could go away. Like that could very easily flip back to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Craig touched on one of the other things that was super kind of sketchy, but not necessarily wrong, which is all this shit that happens at 4 a.m. And I mean, there was a ton of this, like, all of a sudden, look, we just found a whole crap load of Biden votes.
Okay, so there's actually an explanation for this that's just pretty straightforward. And if by Occam's razor here, it's probably going to be the right one. So they did heavy ballot canvassing and ballot harvesting in Philadelphia and other places. And, Milwaukee and yada, yada. So what that means is they didn't just have someone go out there and ask for if they could turn in the ballot for them. They went out there and said, hey, I would like to tell you about Biden until your ears bleed. Why don't you go ahead and sit down with me for a half an hour? Here's a scarf. Here's a coupon to go to Dairy Queen or whatever.
And that's also questionable on the legality.
If it has any kind of monetary value exceeding a certain threshold, it's definitely illegal. If it has any direct impact on the decision, it's definitely illegal.
Which is why which is
harvest
why
thing.
we've seen some other people like that nursing home lady and whatnot.
Yeah. So the thing that makes it plausible and as a reasonable, rational explanation that isn't like full on nefarious here. It's just that Biden did the legwork and Trump didn't. So think of it like when Hillary didn't campaign in the Rust Belt and then lost it.
Well, yeah, I mean, just
what would make it?
If you take a look at some
reasonable.
of these numbers that I've just posted here, statistical analysis, it shows that a lot of people, they didn't bother to vote for anybody else. They were just going out for Biden. They didn't worry about
here's the thing.
the mayor.
A bunch of cynical Democrats were suggesting that, well, if they cheated for Biden, why didn't they cheat for anyone else? And well, my very simple answer to that is you don't cheat to get caught, you cheat to win.
Yes.
And this is probably where they got caught, which is even funnier, by only voting for president. And
well,
here's the thing: it violates privacy otherwise.
I think Wisconsin has a 5 sigma standard deviation in terms of how many people voted versus the normal vote count for that area.
Oh yeah, like orders of magnitude.
It's not orders of magnitude, right?
Well, maybe like 1.
Probability.
5 sigma. It's like 1 in a million chance that ever actually happened. That's not to say that it doesn't.
Well,
but for an election
lightning
cycle that happens
sometimes strikes 5
years,
or 6 times at the same place within a span of 2 or 3 seconds. That happens. That's totally normal.
That's kind of the point, right? And they're reporting things like 200,000% vote count or voter registration, which they apparently have same-day registration in Wisconsin. So, there is a legitimate potential explanation.
That said, there's also the problem where registration will tell you how many people can vote. The fact that there are some places where the number of people who voted is greater than the number of people registered is a big problem.
Yes, it is, and especially when it's significant.
There isn't a question about that being fraud at that point, or about that being
really
bullshit.
Because don't forget, for most states, if you sign up for a driver's license, you're registered to vote. So in order for them to have this kind of 100%, not just meeting all of their voters showed up, but
if you hit 105%, you have a 5% problem, big problem.
I wouldn't say it's a 5% big problem, but you start hitting 198%. 200%, you're into significant problem territory because where are all these people who don't have driver's license?
No, it's not the driver's license. It's that you have to be registered to vote. It doesn't if it's same day registration, you're still inside the registration tally at the end of it. Now, I can see where for the whole the dead people voting thing and shit like that, there could be issues where the databases are not updated until later to reflect that it was brought to their attention and corrected. But if you're talking about registering to vote, if you're on the register roll, you're on the register roll. If you're not on the register roll, you're not on the register roll.
Well, but that's the thing, right? You get 200%, and the argument they've been making is essentially that it's not that it's 200%, it's closer to 100%, but there's all these people who weren't registered to vote previously, and they just haven't updated it in their database. But either way, right, we're talking about 5-ish standard deviations, which it means a little bit more to Craig and I. But basically, to put it another way, the probability that this happens, where you get this much increase due to random chance, is almost null. You don't get 100% to goal. Ever. That doesn't happen.
Well, but let me help you out here. Let me help you out here. For the people who claim to be members of the Party of Science, in physics, generally speaking, if you want to make a claim that something happened and you want it to be accepted, for instance, in particle physics, you look for a result with 5 sigma significance, which means it's better than 1 in a million chance that you're not wrong. Or sorry, better than 1 in a million chance that less than 1 in a million chance, I should say, that you are incorrect. So if there's a 5 sigma deviation from the average here for historical average on the voter tally in a given area, something really significant had to happen to make that happen, and it's either say Biden really is that loved by all of America, or
just look at his rallies. I mean, they were packed. There were people wall to wall. You could hardly even see for all the people that were at those Joe Biden rallies.
I mean, the one thing to say about this election is overall, more people voted than in any previous election, and that is for both candidates, right? So if you want to turn around and you want to say Biden has a mandate, that's absolute bullshit. Because realistically, Trump and Biden are pretty close to neck and neck in popular vote. I think Trump's down 3% is what it is.
Now,
But it's
now,
there's
am I
70 some
mistaken in
odd,
hearing that
71,
Donald
70.
Trump got more votes than Barack Obama? I had heard that
did.
somewhere.
Well, that's the thing is both sides were energized for this. Well, maybe. I mean, the dead were really energized. They just
Yeah,
came up
they're
out of their
so
graves.
energized they got out of the ground.
Yeah. But aside
Someone
from
shocked the shit out of them.
right, so on the one side, more people have participated in this election than ever. But the one thing that I think that we can take away, that's at least for those of us who are a little bit more conservative, is the Democrats lost big. I mean, they might have won with Joe Biden. Sure, congratulations and all that.
Yeah, you
But
lost a lot of House seats, though, didn't
they
you?
lost a lot of House seats.
And
They
all those
didn't
governors,
get any state seat, and
what
they
happened?
didn't.
What happened with governors, huh?
Yeah, right.
Now, real
So-
quick
so
for
Happened
you
all those
guys.
state legislatures, huh?
Basically, across the board, on every single ballot in every single state, the Democrats lost, except they won the president.
Real
Which,
quick question for you
we-
guys too on this. You guys are science guys. I'm just some layman. Do you think, using your science maths and your smarty
Oh,
brains,
yeah.
do you think that it would be faster to fill out a form with only Biden, or would it be faster to fill out a form with Biden and like dog catchers and like mayors and senators? And
I gotta
people?
consult the lady who came around and picked up my ballot and gave me a new car. I'm sure she's gonna have some fucking answers.
Man, Florida
that
must be a great place to
fat balding woman who decided. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to vote in Texas. I'm living in Florida. Oh, my mistake. Even if I did over there,
fine. As they say, vote early, vote often.
I mean,
Right.
so the reality is
what a
that,
crazy
like
shit.
everything else in this country, right? Because we have diminished the power of the states and local governments as much as we have, the majority of people end up predominantly voting up tickets, so to speak. So I actually, when people turn around, they
Meaning
say,
they give a shit more about up ticket.
yes, they care much more about the president than they do about the Senate, and they care more about the Senate than they do the House, and they care more about the House than anything in their state. Right? That's the reality of our country, and that's because we
for their
have
mayor.
decided to start. When the original setup of the country was local government mattered, federal government did not, and that changed under Lincoln. But
now, I'll say this though: the thing is, we might place a lot more importance on the federal government, but when it comes down to your day-to-day life, a lot of the important shit that you have to deal with is still local. It's just that you're not told to give as much of a shit about your local stuff, and you really should, because if you don't care about it, you're going to end up with things like, I don't know, Biden as president. You might end up with Biden as president, and then having none of what you actually want to happen near you.
Well, and there's other things too, like, so it's folks who, what is it? Was it who's the governor that didn't lock anything down and their economy's doing fine? And they
that's South Dakota, or
is it South Dakota?
I don't remember. It's one of those.
Governor. I cannot remember her name for the life of me.
South Dakota to New York, which is a giant shit show, or South Dakota to California, which has human feces on their streets. Right? Like, the bottom line is your local government matters a lot more to you than the state and federal government. But what's ended up happening is the socialist types have decided that they can't win with their policies on local governments because it'll bankrupt the fucking local government.
Well, that's happened repeatedly, which is hilarious.
They are
actually, it's never been tried, guys.
To not sit there and screw over everybody is to screw over everybody.
Also, I will never tire, by the way, of describing San Francisco as the only place in the U.S. where it is perfectly fine and reasonable to have a foot-thick layer of human feces and use drug needles.
Literal
and then claim that you have the shining city on a hill.
Literal shithole. Like,
it's a literal shithole in the United States.
A hole that has shit in it. There you go.
Like, the poop tracker there is probably the best known website that describes the area.
Yeah. Literal app that you can download on your phones. And by the way, if you happen to travel to San Francisco, I really recommend getting the poop tracker. It'll really save you in shoe
So-
cleaning.
Not to like to get too personal on this kind of shit. Like my little brother lives out there. Hopefully he's getting the fuck out of there sometime soon. Before they come in with the wealth tax, which is a whole hilarious other thing you're going to do over there.
Well, they're already trying
Unconstitutionally in
to
several
tax
ways.
something on people that are leaving, so
Well, see,
he'd
it's
better
not
hurry.
only that they're going to go for like a just over 4% tax on the wealthy in the area. They're gonna try and enforce a 10-year backlog on it. It's not going to fucking work.
Oh,
to
they're
avoid the
super
flight.
unhappy about Joe leaving.
So,
Really?
but he insists that he lives in not San Francisco, even though he's close enough to the area. Like I call it that. And like he's
So he
told
doesn't
me
actually
about,
step in the poo. He can just kind of
well,
smell
that's
it.
the thing is he's told me about not about having to look out for this shit because he's seen it on the ground. It's not like it doesn't exist, and and when we talked about it before, one of those, the weight of a child stepping on one of those needles, it'll go right through the shoe of a kid's shoe, or right through the sole of a kid's shoe.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean,
Stab
you
'em.
know,
Like it's
You can even for me, right? Like New York City is a couple hours away, and I avoid it like the plague, right? Because
at least it's not
like
covered in as much shit, you know.
there's actually very little shit in New York City. It just
Right.
smells like pee everywhere. The
Right.
homeless people use the subway as a public bathroom. Even
Yeah.
though there are public bathrooms in the subway, they can't be bothered to go the extra few yards.
Well, what they really love to do is do it in the car while screaming, just to make sure that you're awake on your way to your job. It's a
Well,
public
I mean,
service,
Absolutely,
Oh my
absolutely. I
God.
mean, you don't want to go to your job, half awake and unable to get to work. You want to,
Yeah, you want to be permanently traumatized and awake.
But going back, so we've tied everything into the federal races. But if you actually take a look at like overall government picture, the Democrats didn't just lose; they lost huge in this election, and it's actually kind of satisfying. So worst case scenario,
Yeah.
or at least worst case scenario from my
Blue
perspective,
wave.
Joe Biden wins, but he can't do shit because the Senate blocks everything.
So that's what
not
so
quite.
that's
I
the
mean,
thing
the
is they might
critical
still
race
try to
theory
steal the
stuff gets
Senate.
rolled back, and any presidential executive orders will get undone. Obviously.
They're gonna try and do with the runoffs in Georgia and what the runoff in Nevada or whatever, it's another state. Doesn't matter. But there's just like three or four runoffs total. I think 3.
Oh,
And,
speaking
they're
of,
gonna
one of them
try and
doesn't
steal
even
the
happen until
majority.
January 2nd. That's the Georgia one. So I
Right.
mean, we theoretically won't even have an answer until then, potentially, which is
So the
fucking
thing is, I
insane.
believe that the congressional session is sworn in or is brought in on January 6th, and then they have that time between the 6th and the 20th to resolve things like whether or not there's enough electors, yada yada, all that shit. So if there's a 12A process, it's going to happen probably after January 6th, with the next set of people, which is going to include the rebalanced House. So even if that was the end of the end of the path there, it's probably going to be Trump at that point. Which I don't think it's ever going to get to that point. But I would be
No.
laughing so hard if it did.
Well, I mean, I'm not super worried because it's looking like the Republicans are going to hold the Senate. They gained in the House.
Right.
They held
time.
pretty much everything on the state and local level. So
So,
realistically,
I think they gained the governor and lost the
not
governor.
a blue wave. They won one seat, and I think we can be honest, right? If Trump lost the presidency, it's due to his fucking mouth. Right?
Yeah.
Like the dude.
Well,
the dude
that or
is-
chicanery.
He's immensely unlikable as a person.
He is immensely unlikable. Like I think we can turn around and say chicanery aside, right?
Oh yeah.
That Trump should take a lesson from this and close his fucking trap every once in a while.
Like, well, it's not going to matter if he's not president anymore. He can tweet those heart's content.
But
I mean, TNN
you
is
look
going
at
to be
it-
a
you
great
look at it,
network.
right?
Don't lie.
I absolutely believe that if it wasn't for COVID, it would have been a blowout for Trump, right? It would have
Probably
been,
wouldn't have been able to do
probably
the
would have
mail-in
flipped
voting.
every
So
single blue state, and that's also possible. Mail-in voting would have probably also eliminated the risk there.
I mean, there still would
So-
have been millions of mail-in votes found, but it wouldn't have been quite so many. Or well,
Look,
who knows? Maybe it
just
would have
because-
been.
Just because Bangladesh isn't located in the United States doesn't mean their dead can't vote here too.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't want to be a bigot, would you?
That's exactly right.
Like Xi Jinping has the most important vote, whether or not he's going to buy America.
That's
Well, I
right.
mean,
And I
you know,
mean, goods are just
And
big
cheaper
since
to
he
guy,
make
got
in
his
big
man,
China,
guy
guys.
is gonna
You know.
get his big upcoming.
since he got his Manchurian candidate in, you know, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure we're gonna all start speaking Mandarin soon and praising the one party.
Oh no. Mandarin is High Chinese. They'll be teaching us Cantonese.
But I think
Well,
that
they're gonna like us first, and then they're gonna hate us.
Trump lost this on his own because of his behavior. Like, it shouldn't have even been close.
And
It's the economy that he was pushing was chugging along so hard
Yeah,
that even the promise of it should have been enough to get his ass back in the seat.
right.
well, it got
And I
74
mean,
million
most
people out to vote.
people
Or is it 70 million? Oh, 70 million.
don't
That's right.
don't get me wrong. COVID certainly took a little bit of wind out of his sails, as it would any president, right? Because if Biden had this, or Hillary had this, and she'd had to deal with COVID, right?
Oh, she would
we
never
would-
have had to deal
no.
with it.
Biden
She would
has
have all been
promised
dead
to
already.
provide Batacalf care, which would obviously have taken care of this.
That's true.
We would have been at war with Russia instantly as soon as she got her ass in the seat. You know, after
That's
she
probably
sold them all the
also
fucking
true.
uranium.
You forget, though, we've always been at war with Eurasia. We've never
I
not
mean,
been
I
at war
think-
with Eurasia.
I think that if
Oh, sorry.
if one
Breaking news, guys. Just in, we have actually always been at war with East Asia. We have never been at war with Eurasia. I just wanted to clarify that for you.
That's good to know. That's good to know.
Okay, cool. Just,
Did
I don't want any
did you run that
miscommunications
by?
here.
Did you run that by the fact checkers? Because that's
Yes,
really
it
our
has
only
I need
not.
to know. I need
It
to know
has been
Fuckerberg's
officially
opinion on that.
undebunked.
That's exactly
It
right.
is rated as true by Snopes.
Oh
Is it?
shit! Wait a second. Has Peter Dow signed off on this? I need to know what the Clinton Foundation's opinion is.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
yeah, right.
Edward McMuffin as well.
Well, you know what I need. What I really need to know is his weather report of the inside of Hillary Clinton's anus.
I
It's,
hear
I've
it can
heard,
be
I've heard
pretty
that
rough
it's
in there because
consistently windy and moist.
yeah, that and there's always she always keeps some hot sauce handy. So
I didn't know how many excuses have come out today.
For why
what
she
exactly
lost?
does a metric
Yeah.
shit ton weigh?
That's
So-
kind of funny.
Well, a metric shit ton weighs approximately a shit ton in powers of 10.
Yeah, but I mean that's in non-freedom units, so I really don't know.
Right. Well, it's like an Iowa shit ton, but slightly different.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes things a lot more clear. Speaking of clear, so have you guys heard of Dominion voting system?
Oh, have I?
Well, that's the one that's
You know
gonna
what's-
be kicking off a lot of stuff.
You know what's great about Dominion is Dominion told us all about Dominion. Their data dump is just great.
So
What fucking idiots!
now the Dominion
Wait,
system.
tell me about this data dump, because I only last I heard, right, it was like 6 or 7 states were using Dominion systems,
Of the
and
swing
that
states,
was of the swing states. It's all the swing states.
30 states are using Dominion software.
So-
Just want to
so
let you know that 30 of them.
What's the big deal with
Well,
Dominion?
in Texas,
So it's not just
been
that they illegally
turned
were
down
networked.
multiple times for state certification because, what is it? It says in here, some of the hardware in the Democracy 5.5 systems can be connected to the internet, but the vendor
Yeah.
claims is protected by hardening of data and IP features.
Well, here, let me help you with that one. They are connected to the internet, which is how they were able to they were able to push updates not only the night before but day of in Georgia. So what
Now,
happened in
we're
Georgia
not going to
was
concern ourselves with the DEF CON a few years ago where they hacked one of these because that's really not important to today.
you
That's
see,
something
after that
that was
whole
in the
Diebold-
past when one of these was hacked. This is
Yeah.
today when one of these
after
was
the whole
probably
Diebold
not
scenario,
hacked.
they should never have allowed another one of these fucking e-voting machines after Diebold proved to be a zero-day nightmare in 2004. So they should never have ever entertained the thought of this. Not to mention the fact that the Clinton Foundation and 5 or 6 different Democrats, each of which have 10% stake in the company. I get that it's just
that's
like
a
cashing in.
coincidence. You're reading
I
too
get
much
that-
into that.
Well, I get it that it's just cashing in, and to be fair here, if there was a Republican that had 10% stake, I wouldn't blame him either. But you have to sit there and consider the fact that only Democrats have a stake in this thing. Like they might have blocked out other people from investing. It might have been one of those scenarios. But come on. Like, you're not even going to try to make this a little bit bipartisan if you're going to be pushing this as what we use to fucking vote?
Well, I hear
vote.
that I hear the Obamas and friends had some investment in Solyndra, and nothing happened bad with that. So, I mean, it's totally on the up and up.
Bad tech, huh?
To speak of voting systems, right? I've lived in quite a few states. I've lived in New Hampshire, New York, Massachusetts, and I've voted in all of them, right? Not this election. That's too bad. I've really missed my New Hampshire
you
vote.
never know. You might have.
I may have. So I will say that the most efficient voting system that I've dealt with is New York's, without fail, right? So first off, in Massachusetts, my wife got harassed because she was registered as a libertarian, so they denied her access to vote for like 4 hours. They kept on sending her back home to get different forms of ID.
Wow.
I'm not even joking. It was a real like they turn around and they say voter suppression. Yeah, Massachusetts engages in. Oh yeah. So this was a point that was rather irritating for her. So apparently the final voting issue the first voting issue they raised was she had an I star on her name because Massachusetts doesn't recognize the Libertarian Party. So they cast her as an I with a star, and that star threw them through a loop. So apparently her driver's license for her address wasn't enough. And then her birth certificate
did they want her to wear that star on like her clothing, maybe on a shoulder or something like that?
And then they turned around and they said the primary issue was that she hadn't filled out the census the last time, which would have been in 2010 when she's not eligible to fill out the census.
God, that's fucking dumb. You know what would have made it easier though? If you'd have just killed her.
I'm sure you
probably would have been able to vote.
I'm sure you can hear her in the background because she had to have like a full specialist come in. It literally took her 4 hours to vote because they actively were trying to block her from voting. So that was the worst I've ever seen. The best voting I've ever seen is
got her names. Should have gotten their names so you could have blasted them whenever this came up.
This was prior to like social media being an actual thing.
Like, yeah, but at the same time, like
you could have posted it on MySpace.
Just their first names, and the rare off chance that in like 5 years,
I even talk about it, and she is just going off over there in like 3 rooms away because it is that much of a pisser.
Scare the dog.
So yeah, the dog is probably curled up in a ball on the couch, afraid that God is going to come down from above. Namely me leaping out and getting him and swatting him for trying to steal food. But so New York is the best system that I've had, and you know what New York is? New York is a fucking Scantron sheet. You fill in the bubble,
and we do down here,
and it counts.
So we do down here. It's straightforward. No, so Scantron is the way to go because you have a paper ballot, you have a fucking electronic ballot. If you want to count the paper ballot, guess what? You got the paper ballot.
I do not understand why they do all of these.
Let me tell you what happened with Dominion. Let me tell you what happened with Dominion in Georgia. This is just brilliant. They had a systematic database errors, was what they claim. So something was wrong in the database in a consistent manner. That was a big issue. It involves so what happens is like they get a smart card that tells the machine who they are, and then they put they use a smart card to say hi to the machine. The machine then lets them vote, and then they hand the card back in as they leave. And then then the card gets recycled back through, and et cetera, et cetera. And we can just ignore the whole paper trail issue at the moment here. The database error was such that it would incorrectly assign the person who's voting to the card, so that it would not match. So they would be voting under someone else's registration effectively. So they did an upload the night before, which means that the thing was networked the night before, plugged into the internet. Then the next day they had a glitch in the middle of the day, meaning that the things just fucking broke down and weren't accepting the cards anymore. And they had to have someone patch it over the internet, which now is election day. Oh wait, that's fucking illegal. And they admit this shit publicly on multiple records now. So that shit's illegal. And I don't know who the hell is going to be at fault there principally, but somebody better get their ass in prison or at least find out their ass for that.
Well, that's kind of the thing.
But then they fixed it, and then they had more glitches and so on. But like the fact is, they did that. The way that data was being passed around. This now comes from the data dump. Data was being passed around, some of it over Tor, which is weird why they would do that. It's secure, so mind you that if you're trying to argue security here, it is pretty secure to do that.
It's just
But
a
at the same
coincidence.
time, why the fuck would you do that?
It's just a coincidence. You're reading far too much into these
Well,
numerous coincidences. I'm sure they're completely
it's
unattached to
networked. It's networked. They admit that the thing was networked because they admit that they had to patch the thing. They also admit that the night before they did a download, which is oddly enough part of the reason they had to patch it in the first place. So they admit to all this, which says that it is definitely networked. And then you have from the data dump the fact that they were actively talking to each other election day, and that it was going over multiple different security layers. It's not a whole lot here to draw a conclusion to start saying that there is plausible problems with the way that they're counting votes.
If they
and
can
there's
hack
also one
into
that
your
counted.
printer, they can hack into this
Yeah,
system.
it's the
really
whole
what
reason
he's
why there's
trying
supposed to be an air gap. It's not just that there's supposed to be an air gap. There's also the problem that, what was it, in Pennsylvania or Michigan, one of the two states, probably both, to be fair here. Well, at least I think it was Michigan. They caught it where it had 6,000 votes that were supposed to be for Trump that were given to Biden.
That was
Was it Michigan?
It was either Michigan or Wisconsin.
Okay.
I think it was Michigan.
Oh, it's Michigan.
County. I think it was Michigan.
Okay.
And yes, it was. I don't know if it's so. Just to be clear,
this is one that was caught.
I've heard people say it as two different things. I've heard people say that it was a swing of 6,000 votes, and I've heard people say that it was 6,000 votes. Right, and the difference between that is the difference between 6,000 and 12,000, because the swing could be 6,000, right? Where 6,000 were registered for Biden when they should have been registered for Trump, if 6,000 votes were for Biden, it would turn into a swing of 12,000 votes.
Here's what's interesting about that:
6,000 subtracted from Biden and 6,000 added.
Interesting about that is that they only mention that the presidential vote was the problem with the counting there. Well, did it affect the rest of the vote they were trying to submit? Were they only trying to submit a vote for president? These are all questions that can be answered without violating the privacy of the citizens involved. So these are all things that should be reflected in the media curiosity, which hilariously, of course, is not present. Because why the fuck would you want to question an election?
As you know, there is no way that our elections can be tampered with. And if you are to bring up any other thought that perhaps a country, Russia, for instance, could interfere in American elections, that's actually un-American of you.
I'm sorry, that sounded like a little bit of a coffee head there. Like that didn't have anything to do with China or anything, now would it?
China has done nothing wrong. Excuse you.
You know, I've seen a lot of people make that argument, which is essentially this pointing out the fact that all of these people that were hot to trot for Russia for 3 years before it was utterly debunked are now sitting there and saying that the elections are absolutely perfect.
I have full integrity, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Of a problem.
I will absolutely say so. I've been voting since 2004. That was the first year I was eligible to vote. I have been voting every single time since then, whether it's the midterms or the locals or the whatever. So I'm very active in it. There is always some shenanigans.
Oh, yeah.
But it's usually small scale. On this election, in this case, it looks to be massive.
So here's the other thing, like they say it doesn't happen. They say yada yada doesn't happen.
My wife is coming in with another thing of voter suppression that she experienced in Massachusetts. So actually, she registered to vote. She was a Republican back in college, and this would have been back for the 2004 election.
Right.
And all of the ballots of all of the Republicans on campus ended up in a box in a closet.
Oh my God!
That didn't. So there was like a on-campus student group that was sitting there and registering people, and everybody who was a Republican got stuffed in a box or a couple boxes and put into a closet, and then they discovered them after the election.
Yeah. No, yeah, I saw that.
It's just a coincidence. Purely coincidental. That's all that is. I've linked up something here. I just thought I'd search on Google for something about things that people might be interested in, and I came across the most curious result. I'm
Yeah, you
looking
might want to
at
go ahead and get that shit
Pennsylvania.
archived.
I'm looking at New York. I'm looking at Ohio, California, Florida. I just happened, maybe somebody would be interested in something like this. I thought I'd search for voter
Yeah.
fraud
So maybe
punishment.
somebody like the FBI or maybe the FEC. I don't know.
And I'm looking, and I see a really large spike in a couple of places. I see a really lot of interest in Pennsylvania leading up to the election. Not really so much, after, but definitely a lot leading up to it. And then Ohio, I see quite a lot. New York, California, and that's probably nothing. That's probably just a coincidence, Probably doesn't mean anything.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the point, right? At the end of the day, we're looking at numerous states that have numerous issues. It's not like it's one. So again, every election has some of it, and there's some group of people who are hemming and hawing, and you people who are losing, and there's usually almost zero evidence of it. In this case, we have a ton of evidence, and it's like, wait a minute, what? Where did this
Evidence.
come
I
from?
think when you say evidence, you mean cope, sir. Maybe you should cope harder. Try coping a little more. Maybe you can
take
cope,
a draw off the
Mr.
copium,
Copeman.
right?
Maybe you need to cope, bud. You need a little bit of a cope sauce, maybe some of that copium.
Yeah, sure, that's what it is.
Oh, okay, cope harder, brother. Cope a little harder for me.
Look, I'm not exactly seeing where you guys are coming from here because everybody knows that Gary Johnson's going to win the election anyway.
Come on.
Ouch.
I don't know what you're talking
Here
about.
come that
Jeb
Gary.
is the man's
Ouch.
man.
Here come that Gary.
Jeb is the big winner.
That's
Oh,
not
please
fair.
clap.
That's not fair. That's just being mean.
What?
You're
that's,
a
that's
meanie
being,
pants.
That's being meaner than saying, haha, JoJo.
You're a meanie pants. That's
No,
what that is.
Look at what the Libertarian Party did. It went from being actually about libertarian values to fucking bowing to Marxism because reason.
You know what? My wife voted for Joe Jorgensen, and I was ashamed. It's a real true thing. You gotta cast your vote the way you feel. I understand.
Well,
that,
yeah,
but
there's other things to vote on and so on.
there is.
He's only definitely wrong about one thing.
At least it was in a state that doesn't matter, right? Because my vote in New York doesn't matter.
Hey, local politics matters. Everything outside of the city is kind of the same, right?
I'd say that local politics matter, but every single year at tax year, I get a letter that is written to me by my county apologizing that they have to take as many taxes as they do because all of them go towards the state budget.
Yep.
It's a legitimate letter that I get every year apologizing that 99% of my taxes end up going to New York City. They itemize it too. It's really funny. They're pretty determined to make me know
as
that
you
it's
know,
not,
sir, the needs of
it's
the
not my
few
county's
outweigh the needs
job.
of the many.
It's all of these unfunded state liabilities. They're very sorry.
You know what? Here, I've actually got something for you, Evan. Here's a symbol you can add to the graphic for this thing, and then you can also fill out the rest of the warning label next to it. Warning facts might exist.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of, that's a really worthwhile topic to speak on because it's, up to the moment. Warnings on things.
So
everything.
I tried to get more of those, and it's funny. I actually literally repeated people who got the warning. Literally, I quoted and not quoted of these other people to try and trigger the warning on my own feed. And I guess maybe I fucked with the 5G oxygen shit too often. Maybe I jerked it till I went blind here. But it's not giving me any of the warnings. I can't get the thing to give me warnings anymore.
Either that or, there's another possibility, which is in the scale of actual people who matter, you don't.
Well, that's what I'm saying is maybe they just kind of clicked the little option on me. No more warnings for that faggot.
My guess is that they probably turn around and say that this is your average outreach per tweet or whatever. And they said, okay, you don't have a significant enough impact
that is self-fulfilling. That's self-fulfilling. If they fucking shadow ban my ass every week, of course I don't have the outreach. because nobody else is gonna see me.
Well, I mean, you're not the only one who's shadow banned on Twitter. I mean,
I
come
know,
on.
but like I get that shit. Like I get that routinely. At least I get deboosted, and at best, a typical month, at least 3 of the 4 weeks of the month, I'll have at least a day where nobody's gonna see my shit. Why? Because they decided that I was saying things, and I can't do that.
I used to check the shadow ban thing, and then I gave once I realized that nothing I said mattered.
Well, I just find it hilarious that like they think that something I say does matter.
I used to
And I
think that was
say they,
hilarious.
but it's an algorithmic thing. Like I'm pretty sure there isn't a person who's like following my shit, going, "Yeah, that's crap. I'm gonna go ahead and shadow ban them."
Yeah, you
You know,
probably don't
I
rank quite up there
mean, it's
enough. I mean, you
it's a
aren't
great
the,
idea.
the
It's a great
president of
idea
the
that it
United
happened.
States. You don't need
Although, to be
somebody
fair-
dedicated to making sure.
to be fair, I don't think the shadow bans, the stuff that detects shadow ban. I think they've gotten better at it to the
It's a
point
little
where
better.
it's not detected as often as because I used to get shadow banned all the time, just like all the time, and then all of a sudden it stopped, and so I only get shadow banned occasionally. But
Oh, you can rest
it happened.
assured they've got some sort of new deboosting or
Yeah, no, I'm
not
sure they
shadow
do,
ban
right? Like at the end
system
of the
in
day,
place.
if you create an algorithm that says, "Hey, I'm checking for these things to see if you're shadow banned," they're gonna find a way to shadow ban you without checking those 3 things. You know what I mean? Like no matter what, it's an arms race of identification versus non-identification.
Well, I mean, we're at kind of a
Yeah.
different place, where we were, where it would have been, like virus makers versus antivirus makers. Now it's, banning versus ban evasion almost.
You know what actually makes me sad as an individual who used to identify as progressive, right? And that was because I was told progressives want to make
Oh.
things move forward.
Oh, you thought it meant progress.
Yeah, right. So,
Silly you.
Oh, you.
So I was an idiot back when I was like 17, 18. I'm fully, I apologize for being a moron at that
Oh, you
time.
thought
and
words
voting at
had
that time.
meanings. Oh, you.
Look, a mistake is only really a mistake, or it only remains a mistake if you don't learn anything from it.
Right, exactly. That's absolutely true. So I do, but I still feel bad, right? Like I believe, they sit there and they say, "Oh, I want, voter disenfranchisement." I'm like, yeah, I actually do believe that you should be 21 before you can vote. Oh yeah, and you should probably own property because if you can't manage to do either or,
Let's go
then you
back
really
to
don't have
1800.
you don't have any skin in the game and you haven't really figured shit out yet.
There we go. Well, you can say, well, yeah, but I own my Lego set. Fuck you, that's property.
But so like I remember back in the day, right? It used to not be like this, where they would ban everything. The left used to actually make arguments, and that was something that like even if I was a teenager, right, and I knew nothing.
Well, the
Because I
left
was
was
a fucking
racist then,
moron
so,
teenager,
they were able
right?
to make arguments because arguments are racist. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Maybe that's the case, but now the problem that they have is that they lose ground in the culture war, even though they have the entire power structure behind them, and that's because they aren't making arguments anymore. They're just
So-
making up random shit and yelling at people, and that doesn't work.
But Coca-Cola told me it works. I
You
don't
gotta remember,
understand.
though, Trump is a 90s Democrat, so he's pretty
He is.
representative. He's pretty representative of what a Democrat used to be like, sans agreeing with the Republican platform. He makes arguments. He might not always
Yes.
do it the best way, but then again, he's a fucking Democrat. So I'm not really expecting a whole lot.
Well, I think that you should look
Like,
at it as
they used to have reasons behind the shit they did, besides,
yes.
but that's racist and but that's sexist. It used to be better than this reactionary shit fest.
I think when you look at Trump, right? When you look at Trump and you're trying to understand why Trump does what he does, at the end of the day, Trump doesn't make any decisions. Like, he makes every decision, but he doesn't make any decisions. He hires people to make decisions for him. And so he chooses the best of the best in a series of best of the best. So he puts those people out there to present him with information that they believe is the most accurate, and then he makes the most sensible decision from the information that's presented. which is why he sounds like a fucking idiot every time he opens his mouth.
Because he is.
But because he is, he's a fucking idiot, right?
Yeah.
Like critical
can
race
admit this.
theory. Critical race theory was an easy win in debate 1, and he somehow fucked that up. I don't know how you fuck up on critical race theory.
Yeah.
Like, you literally have to know nothing about critical race theory to fuck up on answering a question about critical race theory, because nobody is going to support it if they know what it is.
Well, exactly how much do you want to make your race, your sex, your heritage, and all these little details? How much do you want to make them central to your ability to fucking process information in your life?
Right.
So my skin color is such and such, therefore I have this ability to say anything about this thing.
Are you questioning original sin?
Aren't you in that unique
it sounds like
of
someone's
people?
questioning original sin here. And that sounds heretical.
Yeah, there we
And
go.
I love the science.
Unbeliever.
Are you questioning the science? Because the science is the awesome.
Yeah, the science of the shittiest part of sociology.
But think about for a moment, just a moment, of how much ground the left has given up to the intellectual right, because they decided that they weren't going to argue these points anymore. They weren't going to debate these points anymore, and as a result, every single time that they come out, they sound like fucking morons because they don't have a rehearsed argument to give to combat stupid shit
Well,
that the right says.
They never practice their argumentation. They never refine their arguments because arguments mean that you're bad.
Well, also they don't practice what they preach either.
I think their premise is that arguments don't mean you're necessarily bad, but the idea that you would give somebody who you disagree with any sort of legitimacy or platform is what they're arguing against.
No. I don't even find it to be that complicated. The very act of allowing yourself to entertain another idea, because, mind you, you're able to entertain the perspective of another without necessarily internalizing those opinions. The inability to do that, so doing that at all right now is considered verboten. You aren't supposed to do that anymore. You're supposed to just agree with somebody else, and then you can agree slightly differently, but that's about it. It's back down to asexual reproduction for the Darwinism here. There's no crossbreeding at all.
And that's kind of a shame, because so my transition away from was the progressives have a point but don't have viable practice, to the Republicans have a point to, oh my god, the Republicans end up being right on everything.
But they aren't right on everything. The Republicans are very, very often wrong on shit, but they're not as wrong as the goddamn progressives.
That's probably an accurate phrase.
Like, it's because it's the same thing with any other crowd system. Like, none of us are as dumb as all of us, is basically what it comes down to at the parties.
I would agree with that. I mean, the upside is the Republicans have what I turned when I was younger, and I said, in order for me to vote for a Republican, they need to basically give up on the far right, or the far religious right?
Yeah.
And you know what? They've done that.
Well, Trump is, because he's a 90s Democrat, is basically what brought that to the party, when people of our age have come up to the point where we're able to kind of start taking over the party base.
Yep.
And none of us want that shit anymore, because it's literally it's more to the libertarian position on that. It's, look, keep that shit to yourself. That's for you to care about. The rest of us, we're fine without you having to sit there and spit it at us every day.
Yeah.
Even if we go to the same fucking church, it's churches for church, not for out in the ballot booth.
Yep.
It comes down to that kind of crap.
And I think that's one of the things that Trump did fairly well, was he tossed enough red meat to the evangelicals without sitting there and compromising.
He tossed
the
them
middle.
3 court seats. That's what he did.
Well, I don't know if he tossed them 3 court seats.
Well, he dangled at least one in front of them.
I would agree with Amy Coney Barrett filling that mold of religious conservative, but I don't think the other 2 did.
Well, no, we have to be honest. It really remains to be seen, too, when it comes to Amy Coney Barrett.
I was talking to someone yesterday, and They were saying that her thing is based like this friend of mine's a lawyer in England. She's pretty well convinced that ACV is gonna go after abortion, like it's her thing. And it's like yeah, but like there's only so many ways you can contour that, and there's no outright reversing that as precedent.
No.
Period. And like she might be in a dissent, and then I was informed politely that she writes very shitty dissents, which I can believe, because if you've lost on a case decision, you might just end up being like, yeah, whatever. When you have to write if you're part of it.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, hell, that's how I end up engaging with renewable energy on a weekly basis.
Right.
You're retarded. That's my dissent.
You know what? That's actually a completely perfect segue into something I was wanting to talk about, because Australia.
Someone's retarded?
Maybe so, maybe no. Actually, I'm kind of curious to get your input on it. But Australia is going to be building a giant battery bank. I'll link the
cool
thing here.
Fantastic.
Are they also going to be building it on a fucking fault line?
Probably. Either that or near like a death bear.
No.
Probe.
This is better.
Oh, sorry, they don't have death bears. They have drop bears.
Please, all right. So I gotta say this right off the bat here, especially without having some sort of renewable or less environmentally intensive resource to draw upon for the energy requirements. Lithium mining and refinement is an ecological disaster, and if you drive around an EV, you are driving around an ecological disaster. So,
and it's worse.
And there's no excuse for it. There's no excuse for it.
Worse than coal.
It's way worse than coal because you got to power it from somewhere too. So it is like, look, we need electrical vehicles in the future. We do.
Yeah, actually, let me just cut in real quick and just break that down in a super easy way. If you're driving an electrical vehicle, it doesn't care where the electric came from. It could be from you riding a bicycle and eating bananas with a generator, or it could come from a plant that burns plastic. Just plastic
from a
pellets.
Plant that burns infants. You never know.
Absolutely. It could run on the blood of the homeless and orphans.
So like I said, so the technology does need to be improved. That requires people who invest early. So we need the electrical vehicles. It's just that you got to remember you are driving around an ecological disaster, and there's no argument against that fact. So if you ever get holier than thou about the fact that you're driving an EV, the only thing you can really be holier than thou about is the fact that you're helping push the industry forward with technology. After that, it's all bullshit, and you're all wrong about it.
Well, I mean, so EVs have their place, right?
But we're gonna need them.
That I have with them, I think that they as a powertrain system are one of the better powertrain systems that we've ever really designed.
Sure,
right?
yeah.
There's
you've got all your torque from 0 RPM.
That being said, everything about a battery. So I divide the powertrain versus the power system as two different things.
Well, you have power transfer as powertrain.
Is fucking terrible, and batteries will never be a good technology. You physically cannot store enough electrons in a confined space without it exploding.
So this is why hydrogen fuel was the thing that we were talking about before. Hydrogen fuel is important, and we're not going to have enough time to go into it this time around.
No, that's a whole thing in and of itself. Actually, kind of worthy of its own show.
So that's something I can talk about at length, because that's actually part of the reason, like the beginning of my thesis work. Was on the kind of tanks you need to make to hold the hydrogen,
and never even minding getting into like metal hydrogen. That's a whole nother very interesting topic. So
like hydrogen fuel is basically the best bang for buck you're going to get.
Yes.
A battery is not going to cut it long term. Now, right now, it's good. Just for the interim, lithium is as a battery material is great in terms of the energy density you're going to get for transport. It's terrible in terms of the sourcing. It's fucking horrendous. Is actually a better statement on that. It's really bad. Like you don't get to put back the shit you mine the way that you think you want to. And recycling it is not like recycling aluminum, where at least there's a little bit of aluminum oxide in the surface to prevent that shit from just kind of screwing up. Like you can at least pull slag off the top, send that off to the aluminum refinery and get it turned back into metal, and then the rest of it stays metal. With lithium, when you recycle it, it's basically all processed back in with the ore. You basically have to reoxidize it and then reprocess it and re-refine it.
And that's because it's not a stable compound.
It's very reactive metal, and in air, it's going to just form the oxides, peroxides, and superoxides, and nitrides very readily. Lithium's very reactive with air. It's not so. There should be a thing that's distinguished here. Reactivity does not mean like reaction speed. So while it doesn't react very quickly, it is simply a fact that it is going to react with everything in the air. Nitrogen, oxygen, everything except the noble gases.
Yep.
So the only way you can really process it is in a dry room environment, which means a moisture content of less than 2%. That's relative humidity. So that means people have to wear the bunny suits and a respirator on. And they have to have it pulled down tight around their goggles, otherwise all of their skin starts drying out.
Before you even dive into that aspect for lithium batteries, right? The bottom line is they don't have the life that we really need them to have for sustained power grid output.
So they're starting to get
there. They're still about 7 to 8 years before they're no longer viable.
So the batteries. The batteries are starting to get into the lifespan where they're really going to make a lot of, like, there's great technological breakthroughs that have been made relatively recently.
Oh yeah,
talking about in the last 12 months.
That like it just basically adds an order. I don't want to say order of magnitude to the life of these, but very nearly. Like it's an exponential growth in its lifetime.
Yeah. So the way they fail is the electrode will every time it gets charged and discharged, the atoms for the lithium side will get replaced not unevenly. So they get kind of, you can imagine like someone laying down bricks. If like every so often you skip a brick and you put it up next to it, and you come back around, you do the same thing over and over again, eventually you're going to get some areas that are really tall and some areas that are really short. The same kind of thing happens with the way that I keep saying electric. I don't mean that. I mean the lithium comes back to the electrode. And the thing that matters here is that distance between the electrodes determines the electric potential, and the parts of the electrode that are closer to the other side have the higher potential because they concentrate the charge. So what ends up happening is it's a self-reinforcing loop, and you build out what's called a dendrite, which is just a little thin piece of metal that will cross across the battery and short it out. In fact, if you remember the exploding laptops from like a couple decades ago, this is why they were happening.
Even you talk about the exploding batteries 7 from 2 years ago.
Right.
That was the problem.
Same deal. So the technological advances that have been made relatively recently have been able to cut out a lot of the ability of these dendrites to cross the battery, which is huge. So that's going to extend. This is why the lifespan of lithium-ion batteries has been such a big issue. That said, the capacity of a battery bank at grid scale needs to be very large. And if you're going to build a large scale, and they say they are, it's a football field size battery, and 300 megawatts of power output,
which is nothing, by the way. That's absolutely nothing for any grid scale deployment.
Well, here's the thing: it's nothing for base load, but it might be able to absorb some of the balancing issues that they've been having.
It works as an excellent capacitor, really, for people to understand.
You're still thinking that it would take the full amount of surge capacity. I'm not saying that. It's only to smooth out the intermittencies in filling in surge capacity from renewables and the like.
Maybe, but that still doesn't cover the
downsides
associated with the duck curve, right? Like that's the reality of it.
It still doesn't have to cover much, is the point here. Like you're talking about probably in the neighborhood of a couple hundred megawatts, which it could do. Now, the 450 megawatt hours of storage might not be able to cover very much of a ripple,
Well, actually, to read specifically from the article I've got here, it says the battery bank is expected to have the capacity to power 500,000 homes for 1 hour, which, in the grand scheme
Right.
of things, not a lot. But
Not
Right.
a lot.
as
This is
an
what we were
instant,
getting at.
momentary thing, that's really
Okay.
quite
Okay.
a lot.
So we
Well, I
can
think,
back
I
up a
think,
second
I
here.
think the better way to frame this is how many megawatts are in a power plant, right? So you start talking about most power plants. Most power plants are roughly about 1,500 megawatts. That's
Yeah.
roughly where they are. The larger scale stuff, such as the I can't remember exactly what it is. It's like something or other in Japan. It's a nuclear plant. It puts out 8,000 megawatts, or roughly about 90 times this.
And at what
Sorry,
pace?
30 times this.
At what pace?
30 times this.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
So you're
how?
talking about a scale problem. So they're putting out a football field worth of stuff, and something that's like 4.2
Now,
square kilometers outputs 30 times that.
right. So the point that I was getting to here is that so again, like we can back this up. We said base load. So if you talk about the amount of energy that a population needs over the whole year, or even just a day, or whatever, it's going to fluctuate between some known necessary minimum that's called the base load, and it can get as high as some expected maximum. That's the surge load. So it's going to fluctuate between those all over the place all the time. But the base load is what you definitely need to have available to avoid a blackout. Period.
Yes.
And then when you have an insufficient supply to cover your surge load, you get brownouts.
Yeah,
Where you
something
get
like
you get
this,
unstable power.
something like this in a state like California. I mean, maybe
Right.
not right now because things are utterly fucked, but during their normal, only slightly fucked situation where they have the rolling brownouts, it could
not
really
really.
make a huge difference.
This won't make a huge difference. That's kind of the
Yeah.
the point that I'm trying to make. Is
So this
when we
isn't such
start
something it
talking
will
about
design to. That's the
when
thing.
we start talking about the scale of a power plant, this is a fraction of the scale of a power plant.
Right.
They'll
So the
sit there
base
and they'll put things in terms of like this many homes for an hour, and people are like, oh yeah, and they'll take away the power
yeah.
of this many homes. They miss the hour portion of that, right?
Right. Well, that's what I was asking you earlier. Like, when you do the scale of a power plant, that's per what time unit? Like per second, per minute?
No. I mean that's generally megawatts is going to be joules per second.
Exactly.
Or
units
units
well,
per hour.
that's what I
per
want to
second.
bring up.
So,
It's like this is
so-
per second. These power
Right.
banks are like they can do this for
Well, so
1
this is why-
hour, whereas
this is why I was
a power
pointing out
plant
here,
is
300
every
megawatts.
single second it's putting out this 1,500
So
megawatts
300
or however many
megawatts
megawatts.
on this plant is actually pretty significant. So it's 450 megawatt hours of energy stored. So we're just talking about powering so many homes for a certain amount of time. 450 megawatts over 5 hours or over 1 hour rather is the total amount of energy it has, but it only gives it out at 300 megawatts. So
Yes.
it's not giving out. It's not 1 hour at 450 megawatts. It can only handle 300.
Yes.
But the point that I was getting to earlier is that now we've established baseload, surge load, is that this is probably not even designed to cover all of surge load. It's probably only meant to handle
Undoubtedly.
some of the intermittencies in surge load that might exist from trying to
At
incorporate
best,
other things into the surge load, like renewables.
at best, if you were to talk about grid scale solar, this will handle a cloud passing over the panels.
Right. That's kind of the point, though.
That's about the only thing it'll do.
But you can't just hook it in to the network, to the grid, and have a cloud pass over it without having something like this to make sure it doesn't cause a brownout.
That's true. But ultimately, when we start talking about power output, there's a bunch of different calculations we do. One is going to be your cost of electricity or your levelized cost of electricity. And yes, I agree that we need some. Every single time somebody sits there and tells me that solar is cheaper than blah, 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 they're fucking lying. Right?
Well, here's the thing. It's not cheaper because it's a sunk cost.
Right, you have the sunk cost, you have this, you have a whole bunch of other costs associated with it.
And even your maintenance costs aren't going to be that big, but you've got that sunk cost. It's definitely there, and you can't just ignore it.
But we deal with that with the LCOE, which would be the levelized cost. Presumption that every power that you generate gets pumped into the grid, right? But that doesn't happen in reality. So when we start talking about solar, if you could pump every single watt that jumped into the grid, it would be great. The problem is that when solar comes on, as you get to a larger and larger scale solar, they eventually surpass the amount of power that's actually required at that time. So basically, they have to pay other people to take over, which is one of the reasons why solar costs skyrocket, because they do a really good job for this like 8-hour window, right? 8-hour window in a 24-hour day.
So this is where a battery is really important. If especially
Right.
so, and there's people out there who are doing videos and this shit, yada yada, and that's great for them. But they're also they're basically getting like handed a big battery from Tesla to use in their home, which fine, that's great and all. Not everybody's gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna spend $30,000 on the solar setup and then another $10,000 on batteries to get back to break even after 15 years.
It's actually more than that. So I looked into solar for my house, my power needs. It's about $40,000 for me to hook up my house for solar, and I was willing to do that because I'm in New York and we're a deep blue state, so they have all kinds of delicious tax subsidies that I would be reaping at the expense of other people, and I'm really okay with fucking over the little man for myself. I have enough money to do that now.
How very capitalist of you, sir.
What's that?
How very capitalist of you.
I am. I'm absolutely a capitalist. I'm more than happy to sit there and steal other people's money for my own personal benefit, right? And that's really what happens with solar. So it's about $40,000 for the system. I'd only pay $20,000 because state subsidies are fantastic. But either way, right? Like I wouldn't pay that much. But if I wanted to sit there and add a battery system onto that, that would double or triple the cost. It is massively expensive. Batteries provide a fraction per unit cost, right? I think there was a study that came out. Actually, I know there was a study that came out, and it said that if we want to do solar plus batteries as our grid system, right?
Yeah.
Even if solar panel prices fell 90% of what they are today, it would still be less cost effective than nuclear.
Oh, well, duh.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like...
Come on.
But
okay, Mr. Nuclear Technician.
It's fantastic that they're making these strides, but it's also irrelevant when we start putting it into the larger scale picture of how we actually decide what power units we want.
So nuclear plus battery is actually going to be the better way to go about it in general.
No,
and it's largely because
nuclear is the best, actually.
It's largely because nuclear is going to produce battery. Well, so keep in mind when I say battery, part of my mind is also just saying chemical storage. So hydrogen, for example, in my brain is an air battery, like zinc. So, because if you didn't know, zinc air batteries are very common as a thing too.
I mean,
not for grid storage, but as a battery, they exist.
As a small scale battery, sure, but not at grid scale, and that's what we got.
So at grid scale, hydrogen,
multiple megawatts.
At grid scale, chemical storage, you're going to be wanting to use hydrogen. That's the basis for the transport economy that DOE has roadmapped. So like I told you, mentioned that before. It's a slide that I had at the beginning of just about every frickin' presentation I had on it. This roadmap from DOE that shows hydrogen transport. And then, of course, it completely missing the whole automation aspect of trucking. Had a truck at the end of the roadmap delivering shit on hydrogen fuel. So there's that little detail they missed back in 8 years ago.
But there's more to the hydrogen versus, and as we go automated, it would actually have jobs because you'd have to have somebody fueling an automated truck.
Well, yeah, you'd have an automated fueling station doing that.
Right. But when we start talking about batteries versus, say, something like chemical storage through the intro, so I guess we gotta dive a little bit deeper. The reason why batteries are different than hydrogen storage is the energy on a battery. They're basically adding extra electrons to an atom, right? And that's really fucking hard to do.
Well, so here's the thing:
to be supercharged.
So it depends on how you're doing it. So for lithium-ion batteries and lithium polymer batteries, you're more or less in the neighborhood there. There's other types of batteries that are at play here, and even just talking about hydrogen, that's just adding or removing electrons to an atom. So the point here being that there's a great TED talk on it, and I don't know where the fuck it is, but there's a professor at MIT who had this great point about batteries. If you want to make them dirt cheap, make them out of dirt. And he had these molten salt batteries, and these molten salt batteries are actually not an environmental catastrophe when you create them, and they're of course dirt cheap because it involves magnesium and
Silicon.
and something else.
It was silicon.
Yeah, it's so anyway. There's like 3 or 4 components to it, so 3 or 4 elements that are involved, but it's very straightforward and simple. And so if you wanted to do grid scale storage, if you're gonna make a big ass battery, you may as well just dig a big ass hole and use the stuff you dug out of it to make the battery. So this would be how you do it, and it doesn't involve the same kind of problems you have with lithium ion because there's literally a bed of molten salt separating this stuff.
That's true, but I mean, at the end of the day, that battery proposal was thermal storage versus
part of it. That's the thing. The chemical separation was the primary storage mechanism. The thermal part of it was actually a major safety thing. It's walk away safe if it starts to short out. It'll just freeze if you stop heating it. And by stop heating it, I mean prevent leakage through insulation.
I mean, I saw that presentation and I saw the proposal, but at the end of the day, you're still talking about overall costs being too expensive.
So this is kind of the point, though, is that was a very cheap battery because it's literally made out of common elements.
That was hella cheap compared to lithium ion.
Lithium is not a cheap battery. It's fucking expensive and it's terrible for the environment when you make them.
Yes, that's all of that is true.
So there's no way of getting around that ever. And if you want to look at the overall efficiency of using these things, lithium is great for transport because you have to actually move the battery around. The other kind is great if you don't have to do transport. If you're doing grid scale, you shouldn't do it out of lithium because lithium's great for moving around, not for sitting still.
And for the folks that will be listening to this, I've got a link to the TED Talk from Donald Sadoway on the missing link to renewable energy, specifically about this, so that you can actually follow.
Oh, okay. Like. You found it?
Yeah. I'll link it in chat for you guys too.
It's the MIT professor. So his students actually saw the write-ups on. Yeah, that's the guy. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I actually saw the write-ups that his grad students did on these batteries, and their ability to operate yada yada yada, and they all look great. It's just that you have to actually scale them up and hook them into the grid. But beyond that, like all these things are good for is sitting there in the ground, taking energy in, putting energy out, and then that's it. And that's all you want them to do.
Yeah, like as a grid scale or even really large scale storage medium, it's viable and it's reasonable.
It's good for anywhere from the size of a penny to the size of a fucking football field.
Yeah, I mean, it might not be something you'd want in the back of your car, but I mean, something that you would want. I mean, and not to say that you couldn't.
Again, ultimately, at the end of the day, even though those are cheaper batteries than what's being proposed with most lithium-ion constructions, they're still not cheap batteries. They're still more expensive than conventional generation technology.
Well, yeah, but the point is that they would allow you to have more dynamics involved with conventional generation.
And that's true, but ultimately, I think
they aren't going to ever replace any of it.
Well, and secondarily, too, to the both of you, we've got to consider the economy of scale on these items as well, because there isn't really any sort of infrastructure built around this either. If there were,
that's the thing is you don't really need a whole lot of infrastructural change. So the batteries that Dr. Sadoway was talking about here, they're made out of very, very common elements.
Yeah, they are.
And in terms of the infrastructure, they operate at whatever current you want. You just have to have a transformer next to it that'll step up the voltage to wherever it's needed on the grid. So in terms of what would they really do is it would help things is they would decouple the grid from on-demand generation, which is a huge benefit if you have a power plant that operates at a given capacity most optimally. So if you can run your power plant at its optimal efficiency day in, day out constantly without changing parameters and just keep it steady state and have the excess energy, the nighttime surge because the base load lowers, you don't have as much requirement for baseload. If you're producing more than baseload as an energy company right now at nighttime, you're wasting your energy because you have to sink it. You can't just produce it like that. Instead, what happens is it just lower production.
Well, and to put that into an analogy that basically anyone can understand, when you're running your car at just that right RPM, you're not going uphill, you're on a flat plane, just that spot where it does really well and you get your best fuel economy. It's like that. It's like you can run it on cruise just like that all the time because you've got something riding your highs and lows.
To give you an idea right now, right? So the person listening to this is, on average, is probably going to be, in generic Joe Schmo living in a home in the U.S. with a power company, et cetera, providing them their energy. Meaning that if unless you're on a battery-driven device like a phone or whatever, if you're on a computer hooked into the wall, you're probably getting the electricity required to listen to this right now as it's being generated, because we don't have built-in network capacity. This is what that aims to solve by providing the built-in network capacity. The extra energy that would be produced at night when a system is running most optimally would be able to be stored, and then it would be able to be discharged back into the system during the day, decoupling the power plant from the demand of the user. The other major benefit of this, which is huge, is the fact that we all use semiconductors, and semiconductors very much fuck with AC electricity. Big time. Like, just the way that the electricity comes back into the system with AC from having transistors and diodes involved, you get a whole bunch of this excess noise that causes major losses in other active components, say like transformers. So if you have your delta winding in a transformer that's designed to get rid of your third harmonic hum, so sorry to go off in the deep end there, but for the electrical engineers in the room, you're probably all cheering at the moment. Basically what happens is you don't just get that one sine wave that comes in with AC. You actually get that plus a whole bunch of harmonics. So multiples of the base frequency.
Let me actually stop you for a quick half second on that and just explain that as that's kind of when you get a dirty signal.
Yeah. So imagine,
if you know anything about audio, if you know anything about audio, you've got a clean signal that you can hear, or a dirty signal, and you can hear that too. It's the same thing, but it's with the juice that runs electronics. Just
imagine you have a guitar and you imagine you have a guitar and you just kind of like put it down on the ground next to the speaker and it starts to hum. Yeah. You'll start to hear some of the higher frequencies too.
That's exactly this kind of dirty noise we're talking about in electricity here. Just to
so that comes
make
through
that a real thing for you.
Now, if you have what's called resistive losses and you have reactive power. So you have active power, reactive power, same kind of stuff. So you can imagine like a regular resistor that gets hot when you put current through it. That's going to be your active power or your losses. The reactive power is like through an inductor or a capacitor. So that's like pushing. That's like closing a bottle of a water bottle that's empty, closing it up and squeezing it, and then it'll expand back out when you let go of it. That's kind of like reactive power. It's like compressing a spring. So that comes back to the system, or back into the network after it gets released by your device. So those are passive components. Your active components, like transistors and diodes, they are going to rectify the current, meaning I'll only allow it to go one direction, and that causes this buildup of noise in the network that has to be balanced out and filtered out. And because everybody has a smartphone, a computer, a TV that's digital, yada, yada, yada at home, we have a whole bunch of these active components plugged into the AC system, or the AC network. And this kind of extra noise builds up and it becomes the thermal loss. And it's also, it's a thing that you can get rid of if you have a place to dump the noise and the signal without just exhausting it as heat effectively. So you have this third harmonic hum that you can get inside your transformers next to, say, a building. There's a delta winding at the bottom because it's three-phase power coming in. Usually you send one phase to one of the three buildings, and that's how you get your one-phase power that comes in. So the fact that they have a common ground, if you allow them to have that delta winding on the bottom of the core, then the third harmonic is supposed to cancel out if you only have passive reactive components that are giving back the reactive power. So only capacitors, only inductors. They send back a signal that will cancel by having that three-phase winding set up in that configuration on the transformer. Since you don't have just passive components anymore, you have a whole bunch of this active stuff. You get noise there, and that can cause arcing and shit. Usually just comes out as heat losses, but it can also travel back down through the common. So you have to do is dump that load from the common wire, which is usually considered to be ground. It's not ground in AC because AC is alternating. It'll pull and push to ground. So you have this just a common sink. And so that common lead goes back to the power station, and they basically just dump that shit through a resistor or through some sort of other kind of active component, like a gigantic rectifying diode, to try and siphon the energy back if they're trying to make a cleaner buck. But it goes somewhere. The differences in the signal, like you're talking about taking something that looks like a sine wave and chopping the shit out of it and giving it this weird crap back. So they got to filter that out and dump it somewhere, and that's how they get rid of it. So the way that you can the better way to do it would be to just dump it into a battery, and the battery will absorb the noise, and then it'll come back out random Brownian, and that Brownian noise can just be rectified as DC power from a battery. So you can go DC to AC, and then it goes back into the system as clean AC power. Like, I know this is kind of a long technical roundabout way of saying that there is actually a purpose here, but it's not just to cover the surge load. There's a whole bunch of great reasons for a battery at grid scale that don't require you to power everything.
I don't think there's necessarily an argument against doing that. I think the question is whether it's economically feasible to do it as grid scale storage, and what are we actually talking about?
Well, it's like we're talking about economy of scale, and it's probably not going to cover the big difference that we're going to be looking to make up here. So in that respect, you're definitely right. It's going to cost too much.
Well, and that's I think the ultimate point is it's congratulations to these people for coming up with a variety of different ways to do a battery to try to hook one up. But realistically, they treat this as if it's a major milestone in getting renewables up and operational.
Well,
and they're nowhere near getting renewables up and operational at any sort of reasonable.
Well, even without the renewables part included, if you're talking about a state like California where they have the P whatever the fuck it is, the one company that does the whole state,
PG.
you're probably still right.
PG&E.
You're probably PG&E. You're probably still right that PG&E is not going to see a major boon to plug in one of these suckers in. But if you're talking about like a municipality, you're probably starting to get to you're probably about where you're going to be able to break even.
Maybe.
The point is,
I mean,
there's
a lot of suppositions. There's a lot of suppositions.
The major one here is where the fuck you're going to put it. Because who's got 3 or 4 spare football fields worth of land hanging out right next to town that you're not going to go near, and you're not going to like have anybody try to invest in? That's also somehow not going to be taxed. So there's a whole bunch of these other bits to the story here.
Well, and that's really what it comes down to when we start talking about batteries or renewable energy.
So
at
full
the end
grid
of the day,
scale,
to make them
okay.
viable, it requires a maximal environmental impact. In order to take diffuse energy sources and turn them into something useful, we basically got to burn trees, right?
Well,
like
if you're talking about like big grid,
forests, and
if you're talking about big grid though,
forests.
If you're talking about big grid, like you're talking about like so the nation is divided into what is it, 5 or 6 regions total, or no, it's 3 regions.
3.
Yeah. So if you're talking about that scale, then it's a drop in the bucket if you pick a location to wipe out and then drop in a giant ass battery. It really is. Like, I mean, you probably want to distribute it a little bit better than that because you don't want to have that many hot wires. But if you're talking about full grid here, if we're talking about the 3 different segments in the U.S., you're going to be able to do grid scale storage without pissing off too many people. If you're talking about a municipality, you're getting into the realm of having some questions about whether or not you can do it. If you're talking about in the home, then you can get away with it to a certain degree, just because you get to decide how you're going to allot your own space. But if you're like, say, in an apartment in the middle of New York, you can't do it. if you're talking about New York City, where the hell are they going to get the land? They're not going to do it, and they have way too much demand. So there's also a certain kind of limit on the demand density of your given region when you're talking about still trying to do things at the local or municipal level. So they're really that gap, that kind of quantum leap between a city and one of the three regions is kind of a big one that they can't really overcome with the scale up an infrastructure that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
the economy
this basically
of scale
kind of
drop
fits
in price.
into a bit of a niche. It's kind of pigeonholed
It's almost
technologically right now. Like for the home, we are there for the home, but
sure, but
grid
it's really
scale,
expensive.
not really. For an apartment, again,
Yeah, I mean,
not
we're not
really.
even there. We're not even there for the home, right? Like
again, it's just really expensive.
Again, you're sitting there and saying, "Can we?" But we could also sit there and burn babies, and that does not necessarily mean it's a practical means of
I
extracting
lost the
energy.
first part of that, and I imagine it was probably more offensive than the second part. But anyway, go ahead.
I'm just saying. Like what we can technically do is different than what is cost effective to do, right? And we need to keep that in mind. So yes,
my point here is
deploy household scale solar plus battery, and it doesn't fucking matter, because if you want to do that, you got to be a fucking billionaire.
But again, the point here is that as you get
in order for that to happen.
As you get to larger scales, the cost effectiveness becomes more of a question. Is part of the point there.
It's not.
And there's
it's
a
not
crossover.
The cost effectiveness becomes more of a question. The cost effectiveness is a question at this lower scale.
Well, what I'm saying is that there's a crossover around municipal level.
To larger and larger scale, not only is it a problem at small scale deployment if people were actually required to pay for the battery plus solar system at full sticker price, which they're not because of government subsidy, right? If we were to ignore that entirely and just talk grid scale stuff, it becomes completely non-viable there. The more and more we scale up renewable energy into the market, it's a market penetration issue, because basically
keep in mind that this isn't renewable when we're talking about batteries. It's just a battery.
It's all part of the same system. Like, we don't need batteries if we have base load. We only need batteries if we have intermittency.
It solves a lot of major problems. So here's what I'll liken it. The sunk cost of putting in grid storage has not been overcome by the losses that are experienced by the network yet, but it's quickly approaching that. What is definitely overcome is the day-to-day losses that can be reversed back into gains for the power companies. They can operate much more efficiently at certain given steady state points, right? Pretty sure we can agree on that.
Well, if you like, this is basically sweeping up the tobacco off of the cigarette factory floor, so that you can make a couple more cigarettes.
Let's like this. Your gas mileage is better if you're not constantly speeding up and slowing down your engine. And that's directly analogous if you're talking about certain types of generation.
Yes and no. So the way you got to understand how the power market works, right? And it's not like we're speeding up and slowing down, right? We're not hitting the gas and hitting the brakes.
Don't do that.
We actually have different base load sources which have different peaking options.
Right.
And so what we deal with is we essentially deal with a marketplace solution. And this is one of the problems that solar and other renewables generate, is they basically dump power to the market and they say, whatever, I have enough tax subsidies that I don't care whether I make a profit or not during this period of time, I'm going to generate anyways. And so what ends up happening under normal circumstances is basically you're trying to balance the amount that's produced versus the amount that's required, right? And so these are constant adjustments on, infinitesimal, like, millisecond time scales that are done. And what will end up happening is they'll say, hey, we need a little bit more power. And so what you'll have is now, because gas is so cheap, you'll have peaker plants that'll just be idle. They'll kick on.
Right.
And they'll take advantage of the increased price that comes in as increased demand comes in over a certain period of time. The peaker plants will take over that.
Now, hold on. Are you trying to imply that free market solutions work? Because I think that's racist.
That is, free market solutions is actually how the energy grid operates. Now, what we see as consumers is basically a standardized flat rate because people don't like to see the fact that on day X at time Y they paid 10 cents or 6 cents or 5 cents an hour, and then on at day 2 on time Z they paid 30 cents per hour. But that's what's actually happened, and the billing companies end up levelizing this out to all of the consumers so that it doesn't look as scary as it is. But realistically, what ends up happening when we start talking about the grid makes a call, and that call is met by a variety of power producers that want to meet that call. So if you take a trip out west, and I highly recommend this for anybody, you go to one of the great dams that we have out west over something like the Columbia River or in one of those, Grand Coulee is a fantastic one, the Hoover Dam, and you get to do a tour. What you'll actually watch as they do it is you'll watch the pool of water at the bottom of the dam temporarily slow, and you won't see any frothing there. And then all of a sudden you'll see it speed up, and that's because they got a power call, and they decided that it was worth generating and using their equipment and paying the cost to generate for that power call. But then that power call will drop because load in the country dropped, and all of a sudden they'll stop generating because it's better for them to sit there and stack the water behind the dam. And that's what we end up seeing in a lot of these cases is we actually have this peak production versus demand, and we basically balance these loads as things go up.
Right.
Where Craig is correct, there is some advantage to be gained in those milliseconds of difference between power requirement and power production.
Well, it's not just that; it's the efficiency of your production that can be taken advantage of.
You could also kind of say that it does smooth out that sine
it's not a lot. It's not a lot.
Country.
This is the whole point I was making earlier. Is it's not a lot that you gain out of it, and that's the reason why the sunk cost for putting in any kind of grid level storage has not been met by the gains you would get by changing your efficiency like that. You need to not just have the day-to-day cost advantage. You need to have the sunk cost advantage typically covered within about a 10-year period. They haven't seen that yet.
You're not going to get that because, and again, this is because the power market is designed such that calls and asks are pretty much met on demand.
Well, like I said earlier, all that kind of adjustment, like all that adjustment as well as the generation is more or less instantaneous, and that's why you get power into your home at basically 60 hertz, 120 volts. How many amps your breaker's going to do, like 200 per house.
Whenever you folks at home are sitting there and flicker a little bit, but they don't go out, that is actually a difference. That's basically a demand spike. What's ended up happening is there's more people who demand it than power is being produced, and there wasn't a price on the market that producers were willing to meet until it hit a certain point, and then they kicked on. And that's why you get those little flickers in your house every once in a while if you're paying attention.
Yeah, so that happens, and that happens like more or less instantaneously. The same way that the generation more or less instantaneously will meet the demand of the customers, save those few moments where there's an adjustment in cost.
That being said, make sure you have an uninterruptible power supply for your important electronics, because that can do bad stuff to you. And they're pretty cheap. Like I said, for the home user, battery tech is kind of where it is. Now, if you're in an apartment or anything, actually get a UPS. Well, it's just good to have.
Now, we're talking like 7 minutes here with these.
When we're starting to talk about what you want to put in to protect your electronics, yes, surges up and down are bad. That's true. But what you want to put in for your electronics is somewhere around a surge protector. And a surge protector is A, not particularly expensive, and B, it doesn't really sit there and hold much power. It just balances out the load in those short few seconds between.
Well, a surge protector is basically just a bimetal junction.
Any reasonable person, you want to have a UPS just on principle alone, because the power, it's going to go out at some point. And you might as well just make sure you're safe. It's a reasonable investment.
A UPS is only going to do one thing for you. It's only going to give you, depending on if you scale it appropriately. Because, by the way, please, for the love of God, count up the amount of watts you're putting into things.
Yeah,
before
don't
you
buy
get
a
UPS.
600 watt UPS if you've got it on a 900 watt power
Well,
supply. That's going to do you no good.
and-
It's going to
and-
be all
and
over.
I-
So the
no,
point is, you want to scale the battery for it because you want to have. It's only going to give you a few minutes to shut your shit down. You're going
the
to get like 5 to
survivability
10.
of those batteries over time is not particularly good.
Well,
No, so
the
make sure you
battery
get a modular
survivability is
one.
fine because it doesn't do much.
Yeah, but it decays at a very quick rate. So if you put on a UPS,
Well-
right, you're not protected for 10 years. You're protected for a few.
No, you're protected for that much time unless you get hit by several blackouts in a row. These batteries are designed so there's basically there's two kinds of batteries because they're like automotive batteries. It's their basis for them. They are specialized, but the point is there's kind of
Not
they're kinda
unlike
like
a deep
automotive
cycle
batteries.
battery.
So there's I was gonna say there's light cycle and there's deep cycle. So the deep cycle batteries are like the ones you see on a big semi truck. They're meant to be drained all the way down to zero and then charged back up many times. Light cycle battery is meant to dip a little bit, but to provide a huge capacity to provide a shit ton of amps when a car needs it. The batteries that they put into a UPS are not meant to do many deep cycles, but they're meant. So that means when you lose power, you have 5 or 10 minutes total to get your computer shut down. That means you want to get it shut down as quickly as possible because they're not really meant to do full deep cycles very often. They're meant to just kind of sit there at full power for years on end, and then to cover, maybe 10 or 20 events before you might want to start checking these things.
And I would honestly, my experience with UPSs is that they don't hold up that well. They have a general.
Yeah.
They're more likely to fail before you need them than they are to be successful when you need them.
Well,
That's
all
what
I
also
can say is
so
I've
here's the
had
thing with their
excellent
UPS.
luck.
You have to make sure you pay enough for them because you get what you pay for with a UPS.
That
I
may
will
also-
say
it's
I've
better
had
to buy
great
once, try
luck,
once on
not
UPS.
sponsored or anything, unless, you want to sponsor me. We're out here. But I've had a really good
Yeah.
luck with APC. Like,
Yeah,
the price
no,
is
APC
good,
I like too.
and the quality is there.
So let me get my fucking flashlight here. I've got this thing underneath my desk. So I have a big chunky guy under here. What the hell is that one? Cyber Power? I think that's the one I got.
I've had fiber powers. I was never really impressed by them.
Well, so this is one of those things. It's like buying tequila when you get these things. You have to go for top shelf, or you don't get anything you're gonna like the flavor of.
Absolutely. It's like the good machining or good work tool machining and shit like that. If you're gonna get it from China, just get
don't go
American
to Harbor
because you
Freight for
really
that
do
shit.
need the best.
Harbor Freight is the best.
No, it's the finest cheap Chinese steel you can get.
Listen,
Best
there is no greater
Chinesium.
supply of Chinesium on the planet. Chinesium is the finest element.
Yeah, it's cheap, plentiful, and breaks easily
Chinesium love you long time.
until you need to pay up again. Oh man,
I love my Chinesium.
Oh no, I love cheap Chinese steel. I just don't like relying on it.
I mean, I wouldn't.
I wouldn't build anything out of it.
It's okay for that tool set that you keep in the car and your car breaks down and you need to fix it before the Dueling Banjos comes out.
Right. How do you know a toothbrush was invented in Alabama? Otherwise, it'd be called a teeth brush.
That's gonna be illegal soon. Because it's racist against somebody.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. There weren't enough black people.
It's not gonna be racist until Alabama votes Democrat.
Look, all right.
Be racist.
Look, the whole Dueling Banjos bit, that whole movie was racist, and it wasn't racist because they were screaming the racial epithets. It's because they didn't have more black people fucking the white guy in the ass.
Now, are we supposed? I didn't think we were going to be getting into demographics and prison populations, guys. I think we're getting into dangerous territory here.
Oh no, this wasn't prison. Well, I mean, unless you consider being surrounded by nothing prison.
Well, this is 2020, so you know.
We're talking about Deliverance, by the way. If you're ever wondering what the hell movie we're referencing here. And if you just go Google dueling banjos, you'll recognize the tune immediately.
Does anybody not know what dueling banjos is?
There's
Of
got to
course.
be like a handful.
Oh yeah,
There
no,
can't
undoubtedly. I mean, there's
No
people
way.
that are completely brain dead to any kind of media that didn't come out in the
Well,
past
that's how
10
New
years.
York. That's how
Can
New
I-
York thinks of everybody south of New York. So
I mean,
there's.
I know that's what I think of you, Craig, but that does not necessarily mean.
I mean, I got my banjo right over there. You want me to start playing this shit? Because I will.
I'm. You know what? I'm
Well,
more
you are a
concerned
Florida
about your
man,
kin in
so
New York
I
City
mean,
spreading the
you
COVID.
you wrestle alligators, right?
Oh no, I eat
does?
alligators.
No, well, close enough. You probably
I almost
know
ride
a
over
fellow
with my
Florida
bicycle
man
and then
that
I eat
does
'em.
wrestle them, though, right?
You see, wrestling alligators is pretending that they're your friend. What they are is like hundreds of angry teeth with a little bit of meat behind them.
Mm.
So what you do is you kill them first. You kill them first, and then you don't let the meat go to waste.
Alligator isn't
just
bad.
recently.
I kind of like alligator.
It's basically it's slightly gamey chicken.
well tough
Yeah.
Tastes
too.
great.
Well, I don't even know if I describe it as slightly gamey chicken. I mean, I don't think there's any way to cook it
It's got its own flavor.
fried or severely beaten with a mammoth.
Well, what you do is you can grill it. I mean, most people don't, but like it's like
I
grilled.
imagine it would be really tough.
Well, it's weird. So like if you fry it or you bake it, it's kind of like chicken. If you grill it, it's more like fish. But it's like
that's
tough
peculiar.
fish.
Yeah, in my experience, alligator's always been kind of tough, but
It's a
Yeah.
gamey meat.
chickeny.
Although I will say I was in Louisiana and they can make anything taste good.
Oh, you pronounced that wrong.
I don't give a shit what you think it's
It's
called.
Louisiana.
We have more votes than them. It's whatever I fucking say it is.
All right, Mr. Electoral College. You're talking like you've already
I bet-
voted something.
I bet you're kind of loser that says crawfish too, aren't you?
There's no such thing as crawfish. They're called crayfish. Thank you very much.
They're the crawdaddies. Get your ass right.
Maybe to the primitive Southerners, but to us civilized folks, they're crayfish.
Uh huh.
Yeah, that's right. Know your place.
I'm sorry. What state do you live in again?
I
I
believe
know
it's
my
under the
place. My
jurisdiction
place
of
is bent over
Comrade
at the
Commissar
communal table.
Cuomo.
Your place is to bend over in front of whose table?
The communal table.
Homer's.
No, Cuomo just demands me have papers to go see my family on the weekends. There's nothing sketchy or scary
But I
about it.
live in the best state, all right? I live in New York, where I have to have my papers.
Happens
Where's
in
the brown
papier?
shirts over there?
No, they're all located. See, the problem is that Cuomo thinks that the rest of New York is New York City. I think because
Yeah.
he talks to his brother a little bit too much.
Oh, it's just
But the
part of
rest
the
of New
metro,
York
yeah.
is really okay. Like, we'd be really quite happy if we just blew the bridges and
Yeah.
said, you know, you
Goodbye,
guys
Gotham.
deal with your problems.
I'm telling you what, man, we really need to investigate that Snake Plissken documentary series. They really had some excellent solutions for the West Coast and East Coast issues.
I mean, realistically, you go down to New York City, and it's, what is it? The Walking Dead documentary. That's pretty accurate for most of New York's homeless population. I'm pretty sure if you're bitten by a homeless person, you turn into a homeless person.
That
Could
sounds
be,
about right.
could be. I mean, it's not
Well,
certainly
no,
not my
think
field
about
of
it.
study, but I do know there
No.
is a great deal of dark energy and quite the miasma of New York City.
Think about it like this, though. You get bit by a homeless person, you end up getting something like cholera. You lose all your money in medical bills, and you end up on the streets. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, yeah,
I'm
it's
pretty
just
sure that they
science.
don't lose any money in the state of New York to medical bills. All they do is claim zero income, and I pay for it. So
Right. What I'm saying is the person who gets bit, who actually has money in a home, ends up getting, a lien put on their fucking house by the
that may be
hospital.
yeah, we got.
And then They lose their money from paying for the fucking medical bills for the diseases that they just got.
You're just not appreciating the lived-in experiences of those who are terrible human beings.
Oh, that reminds me of a story
Yeah.
I was meaning to go over, which is
Oh boy.
just the perfect time for it. In a classic, well, how would you guess that? Corporate landlords sought higher profits during the last economic crisis. Could you imagine in a place like New York City or L.A. that they
So
would?
here's what's happening with landlords. They are just as fucked as all the people who are probably going to get evicted. You know why? Because they don't own the property they have necessarily. In fact, oftentimes they over leverage themselves, and they survive off of the difference between the debts that they can accrue under the loans they've given, and the rents they take in.
Now,
So basically, they decrease their tax burden by paying off the debt that they have for these loans, and they just hold the loans out on the property. And the problem that they have with this is that something like COVID comes along and destroys their income, and then they have to go back to the bank and say, "I'm sorry, but I don't have the money this time."
Yeah,
The bank
absolutely.
ultimately
As a
gets
matter of
fucked
fact,
too.
this specific article doesn't even really go into that. It basically just goes into the fact that they are expanding their holdings. And
Right.
as we see these
By buying
things
it and
happen,
paying
I
for
we're
these
going to
debts.
see
was
that
really,
specific knock-on
like,
effect.
my wife and I were greedily rubbing our hands together during the COVID crisis created by New York being New York.
Mhm.
And we were eagerly anticipating a whole bunch of people running out of money and us acquiring their houses. So I am absolutely, as an individual who's finally reached the point where I can invest in things, was absolutely thinking about investing. And so I entirely empathize with the landowners.
Right. Well, here's the thing: you aren't taking out loans to be able to pay for these other things, and then bitching about the fact that the tenant isn't paying you, which is
I
what's
would
happening.
absolutely bitch
Oh
about
no!
paying me.
What they're doing is, so the thing is, these landlords who owe the bank money and have been dribbling in the money at the lowest rate possible to get these long-term loans so that they can pay less taxes. These landlords are going to get screwed too, because they're going to owe the banks the same way that their renters owe them. And when they don't have renters that are giving them income, not only are the renters going to get kicked out, but the place that they were calling home is going to be owned by the bank, not by the landlord, when it comes down to it. So they're not going to be able to go and beg for their house back from the landlord, because the landlord is going to be homeless with them.
Well,
And
but we
that's
all know that the
partially
banks are
And
very,
it's all their fault. It's
nice guys.
completely their own fault.
which,
But,
by the way, is
you
one of the
know,
reasons why a chunk of land that I was hoping to purchase is no longer going to be purchased, even though they finally got their paperwork sorted out a year
Yeah.
later. I actually bid on this thing like last November or
what
whatever.
the fuck, man?
On it, and they just sent me an email like last week saying, "Hey, you guys actually still want this? Because
Holy shit!
like, you gotta be
A,
shitting me." No way.
a year? No way! Not a fucking chance.
Yeah, nope. I was all for gonna be $800 for like a quarter acre lot.
Yeah.
Not bad actually in the area, but that was all pre-COVID. With COVID, not a chance in fucking hell I want to invest in anywhere right now. It's gonna take a few years.
All it's doing is increasing your tax burden by having more property to tax.
That's exactly right.
There's just no point in that.
Yeah,
That's
unless
exactly
you're
right.
unless you're the kind of person that has the connections like a Cuomo or a De Blasio, it's not really worth your while
Well, at
to
that point,
buy
he
a
may as well be
building.
driving over people while drunk. Like, wait, that did happen. We're not
Listen,
supposed to talk about that one, are we?
the
Surely,
Cuomos are a special and sacred family in New York. Fredo over there.
Look, now that was racist, sir, against Italians. The same way that COVID's racist against Chinese people.
You know, it's always amazing to me. I didn't really. All of these people who are racist, who are racist now, post this like SJW nonsense. I
Yeah.
was really surprised. I didn't know that Italian was a race.
Right. But you see Fredo's like screaming the N-word. How dare
is.
you, sir?
It is. I didn't even know that Cuomo was Italian. I thought that he
No,
like
I thought he just acted it.
right. Like I kind of figured that with the amount of bullshit that came out of his mouth, that he was like from Alabama or something like that.
Yeah, you figure he's not just some Goomba, huh?
Right. Yeah. No, I was figuring. I figured there was a whole other backstory there, and boy,
Now,
was I
what
wrong.
you're really missing out here is that Fredo isn't just racist against Italians; it's also racist against idiot younger brothers. How dare they include that name in a movie?
You know what I actually have to say, going back to our original topic of the election, of all of the things that I'm kind of upset about, right? Okay, so Trump lost, but I accept that because Trump's kind of an asshole,
Yeah.
and he never, in the 4 years that he was president, he didn't learn to shut his fucking mouth, right? So I can accept a Trump loss, and it's not gonna it's not no skin off my back. I think he's got legal options. I think they're slim. All of that stuff that we've discussed earlier. But the thing that makes
Right.
me sad about this election, that is not like I really wish my buddy Trump was going to be in there. It's the fact that I don't get to see Chris Cuomo on CNN crying the next day.
Oh, but you're going to though.
That was the best part of the election of 2016, was watching, because I watched this asshole.
Right.
I watched him every day because I wanted to check my bias, right? So I watched CNN.
Oh, you
I
poor
figured they were
bastard.
moderately liberal. No, they went so far off the rails, and the day after the election in 2016, watching Chris Cuomo cry for his entire set was just the best feeling in the world, because I wanted to punch him the entire rest of the year, and watching him just actually cry, it was like somebody else punched him for me, and I was okay with that. It didn't hurt my hand.
Well, you have to take the wins where you can get them, right?
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's good. I mean, it's a shame no one took his lunch money, because I'm pretty sure he'd have enough for another fucking car or two.
You know what? You're probably right. I'm sure that he's buying the what is that fucking super special cow from Japan?
Oh, Kobe.
Wagyu. Kobe? No. It's
No,
I think it's
or
Wagyu.
Wagyu. Yeah, Wagyu. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure that he has a Wagyu beef sandwich for lunch every day, because he's that kind of fucking rich.
Probably
Oh my god.
I don't even know what to say about these people. I honestly don't. They're really something.
They're dicks. Dude, did you see Don Lemon sitting there crying on TV because Biden got got called in by AP? He's sitting there as, finally it's over kind of shit. It's like, dude, you basically you're one. I mean, we know he's gay, but you're one extra homoerotic look at the camera away from being Frodo. Just shut the fuck up.
I mean, let's be honest. The best take this election was provided to us thanks to Brianna Wu of
Oh my
Gamergate.
god. Banana Poo screaming again. There we go. Bat Woo.
I was,
Orders from the moon.
I'm so glad that she was holding her husband as he was shaking and sobbing that it was over.
Oh god,
And
yeah,
all
and
I have
landing
to-
on his dick, right?
all I have to say is that, her husband's cock must be super small, because there's no way that you sit there and shake and sob over a presidential election.
Well, look. If you add up,
I'm not happy that Trump lost, but I'm not sobbing. Right? I'm okay with it.
All right,
I'm
you gotta remember.
He fucking lost because of his fucking mouth.
You gotta remember.
And I'm sure Brianna Wu won because of hers.
You gotta remember. The sum of inches in that relationship is still less than the average. John Flint is not a well-endowed man.
Mentally or physically. But anyway, we don't, we don't want to impugn anybody here.
We're not impugning anybody.
Look, it's okay to be less than average. It's just that, when you start saying stupid shit and expressing yourself in a way that suggests otherwise, maybe you need to come down a peg or two. Maybe someone ought to throw a ruler at you.
I'm sure he's getting pegged. I'm sure
Yeah.
that's happening.
Well, which him are you talking about here?
That's a good question.
All right. Well, before we get too far down this rabbit hole, because it's a deep rabbit hole.
Are you afraid of this rabbit hole?
Look, John Flint didn't kill himself. All right.
Fair enough. So I've got something here that's you'll love this article.
Let me go ahead and start this one off before Steve gets to it. Wind energy is shit.
Well, just
the
title itself really gives it all away. And I'll share that with you.
It's worse. The entire portion of this segment has now been occupied by Craig's statement.
It's worse than battery tech here.
So,
it's worse than solar. It's an ecological disaster on multiple fronts.
I'm less concerned about wind tech than solar tech because
well, at least solar is made out of sand. This shit eats up our steel production and it kills the wildlife.
And that's kind of the tough part, right? Because your choice is between two shitty energy technologies, right? It's like playing The Witcher 3 and doing the Baron quest. You're like, oh shit, I have to fucking save an alcoholic wife beater's family, or I let them go to the happy fucking beyond. Because either way, it's a shitty decision, right? And that's what I'm faced with wind and solar.
So wind kills all the birds.
That's the thing. Wind kills all the birds, and that's very sad. I really like my bald eagle. Right. I happen to like my cormorants and my endangered species.
You know, the magpies can go die, but at least we'll hear them. We'll hear less bitching at the end of it.
That's exactly right. So I feel very sad for these great birds of prey that the wind turbines kill. But at least it hits 40% average energy generation throughout the year.
Yeah,
right?
But you gotta also remember here though, the intermittency on wind is so much worse than solar. Because at least with solar, you know for a fact there's at least this kind of 8-hour window where the sun will be up.
The problem is right, that wind is consistent. So wind hits 30-ish, 40%. Now both of them have average out to 30% or something like that.
Well, when the wind stops, the wind just stops.
Wind hits a little bit average of about 30 to 40%, or at least what you do offshore stuff.
Yeah.
But solar is 26. And the reason for that is that as much as solar has an 8-hour window, in winter, it doesn't hit the 8-hour window.
Right.
So it goes from a 30-some-odd% installation in the summer, which is where it generates all of its power, to a 12% of installed capacity in the winter.
Here's the thing. You know in advance when these things are going to happen. You do not know this with wind. There is zero guarantee on when you're going to get energy, except for when there's wind.
That is true. When you do not know, when your power cells go down.
And when wind stops, it's not it's kind of like the day's ending. We know it's going to stop soon. When the wind stops, it just kind of goes, nope, no more wind.
Yeah.
You wanted lights, you don't got lights. You fucked.
The thing that's always funny is that you see the people who defend wind. They're like, oh, we can project wind out 2 weeks in advance, and I'm like, all right, well, I can project power demand out for the next 36 years. So yeah, we have a little problem there if you're good only for 2 weeks.
You might even call it a replicability crisis.
And the thing is, they want to put out these big wind farms out in the ocean where it's going to kill more birds.
Well, the biggest problem
not only that, it's going to disrupt whale paths. That's where they want to put these things. Is in the way of the fucking whale migration. The whales are not going to be used to giant metal poles in the water. They're just going to ram into them.
Well, I think the big problem with whales is not running into the metal poles. They're okay with that. The problem is that wind turbines generate infrasound, which basically fucks over bats and anything else that uses sound as its primary method of.
Oh, wait! You mean like whales?
Kind of like whales, yeah. Those motherfuckers have not learned to adapt to use their eyes like the rest of us mammals.
So that was kind of the point that like they have paths they follow, and if they hear a wind turbine, they're gonna go towards it, and not like,
No, they don't
well, I'm
go
not
towards
sure
that.
who you are, but they might ram face first into them.
It would be more like sitting there, and I think a better example for most people would be, imagine a giant blender, and you know it exists, but you don't know where it is because it's surrounded in fog, and your choice is to move forward and get blenderified or not.
Yeah, and no
Because
walls.
all it does is produce this constant low energy hum in the surrounding ocean. Not a good place to be if you're a whale.
Yeah, so the
Throw that
whales are gonna like, so they want to put these things off the coast, and obviously that's the place to do it because no land real estate's lost there. But you have all the problems with whales, fish, etc., etc. Boats, if you want to have boats do fishing, that was one of the things they were going to do was fuck over the local coastal fisheries by taking away their ability to get to the place where the fish are located.
So just to put it into reference in terms of carbon-free energy sources, so to speak, right? Nuclear obviously wins.
Well, that one's actually
Hydro-
carbon free.
Well, yes,
It is.
it is.
It just is.
It's
There's
just
no way to get around that. It's
You're right. It lasts forever. It costs almost nothing. All of the costs are paid for in the first 10 to 12 years. Yeah, I totally nuclear. I think I've argued it half a dozen times here, and I will continue to defend it till I am dead. Right. This is followed shortly by hydro, and hydropower is a pretty awesome energy source. Yes,
Yeah.
we have a huge amount of ecological damage that we do, but this creates a ton of new habitat for a large variety of species.
Oh, it's damage in the way that Thanos wanted it to be. I mean, can we really ask for much more? It's twice the destruction he wanted until the very end of that series because it does a whole bunch of damage, 100%.
It's a mixed bag, though, right? Because we expand the aquasphere and wetlands habitat.
Well, this is the part where it's like the last
species.
This is where it's like Endgame. They'll never know the difference.
Maybe, but
ask the fishies. Where did this lake come from? I don't know.
At least with hydropower, right? Like, yes, we lose species habitat, but other species gain habitat. So it's kind of a neutral category there. Then we come to solar, which requires the wholesale clear cutting of forests and indigenous terrain. Because that sounds environmental.
Well, here's the thing. Suppose you didn't clear cut the forest. Suppose instead you just put the solar panel above it. What happens to the trees below? They die.
Well, I mean, that and the
you
fact
create a new fungal jungle.
Well, since we're in a joking mood here, you guys need to take a look at Energy Vault and their amazing storage.
I don't think I actually do.
Oh no, you absolutely
I have
do.
a feeling I'm not going to be happy here.
Oh, I think you will. And just to put some clarity on why this all got so damn silly,
what the fuck is this face?
Oh, you just scroll down until you see the tower. Yes, tower. But the last article, policy, not tech, spurred Danish dominance in wind energy. So really, it's kind of all a farce.
Well, I mean that's kind of universally true, though, right?
Like, oh yeah, absolutely.
Every single time I see the like renewable advocates, they come in and they say that fossil fuels has all of these tax credits, because that's basically the primary form of attack against these. Is they get a ton of tax credits.
So
fossil fuels get your standard depreciation, which is something that literally every business gets, and your farted on office chair that is, if you decided to run this podcast as a business, right? Your farted on office chair has a 7-year depreciation schedule, which means that the government assumes that in 7 years you're going to need to replace it. Solar panels get a 5-year depreciation schedule.
Yeah, but they have a 10-year payback time.
and it's like a 20-year lifespan. So you look at almost everything else that we do, and they get a rapid depreciation schedule. And then on top of that, they get a huge tax credit. Huge. So for solar, for the listener, 30% of the cost of the installation of solar, and I mean like paying a dude to overcharge you on the panels and putting them wherever the fuck you want to put them, you get 30% of that back year one. Then you get to deduct another 35% of that panel's cost over the next 5 years, right? Because that's what its actual macros is, right? And so by the time you're done with that, at the end of the day, the reason that people are investing in solar is because within 5 years, 65% of the cost of a panel is paid for by the government.
Which really means everyone else is paying for it, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what you're really doing is being a dick to all your neighbors, which that might be a good thing. It might be a bad thing, but that's what you're doing.
But that's the reality of it. So when we start talking about things like subsidies, yes, it's true. You could make the argument that the oil and gas industry gets subsidies. They do have some special carve-outs, but this is basically if they build a well, they're not allowed to deduct the well costs, so they deduct the value of the well that they sell every year. It's questionable. It's kind of squishy, but that's kind of how every other business operates. When we talk about wind and solar and their tax credits, they get all of that stuff plus an additional rebate onto their generation. So it's 30% for solar, and wind generally takes the performance tax credit because they generate a lot more power than solar does, and that's like 2 cents per kilowatt hour that they generate. It's insane.
Yeah.
And that's why you see wind power get built. So what you end up finding out is if you dig into the data, every single time that tax credit expires, wind turbines and solar energy stops getting built, like immediately that year, and then they extend the tax credit.
I gotta ask here, what the fuck is with these 35-ton bricks? Why wouldn't they just use tungsten and make them much smaller?
Exactly. There's any number of...
Well, here's the thing. The way that this scales is doesn't mean like a tower is stupid.
Yes.
Because it's not going to be big enough.
Right.
This is like the thing that was recent where they were talking about pumping air into the ground to do pressurization instead. That made a hell of a lot more sense than this because it would be like having a tower a mile high.
Yes. So for the ones that are listening, because now that we've finally got to this, it's beautiful. I'm going to describe to you the picture of this. So you've got a tower in the middle of nowhere with 35-ton composite bricks comprising it. So it's not really anything. It's just some tower
what
of
happened
bricks.
If the wind knocks this over?
Exactly. At its core is a crane. A 4-way crane that lifts and lowers these 35-ton blocks.
Here's
and
the kicker
when
to
it drops them, that runs the generators. It is supposed to be an energy storage medium. And it is...
I actually consulted on this, or at least somebody was asking me about a design similar to this, and they wanted to use abandoned ski lifts in the mountains to carry things up. And I basically turned around and said that every single tower is going to have an 85% energy loss due to friction on the...
I've heard a proposal about something similar with the ski lift shit.
Yep. So they consulted me. They actually paid me money to look into this for them. And I told them that it was fucking stupid. The ski lift thing was stupid. I told them the only viable way they could do it is if they designed a tower where they basically stacked all of these bricks up, and that would only have the 85% or the 15% loss on the one pulley system up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And so this appears to be something that came out of something that I had a discussion with back in 2013 or 14, somewhere in there. I actually talked to somebody who was looking to develop this.
You son of a bitch.
And I told them it was a retarded idea and wouldn't work.
So basically you gave them the go-ahead.
I am no longer part of this project.
But you're also saying we can blame you and still be right.
Yeah, you can.
Damn
I'm not saying that I'll be right when I blame you, but I am saying that I can blame you.
No, you probably can, right? Because, like I said, the original I was talking to people with was to use like abandoned ski lifts, and they would just haul these big ass bricks up the fucking mountain.
I love the background of this website. It's just a fucking wave breaking. Has nothing to do with what they're trying to sell here.
But yeah, they've been looking at trying to store it like this, and I just don't see it as technically feasible. The energy losses that you get in a friction drift, absolutely huge.
Like they could use, obviously you get grease bearings and so on, and you can decrease the losses you'd get at the get-go from the bearing part of it. The major problem they're going to have is the electrical losses. There's no way to get around those.
Well, even so, right? Even with grease bearings, you should still assume a
You're going to get a
general
little bit
loss of 15 to 20%.
Oh yeah, just
Yeah,
straight out of the gate.
That's a bit
mechanical
high.
loss.
That's a bit high with a just a generic. So even with the tonnage they're talking about here, that's still a bit high. The principal loss they're going to have here, I still think, is going to be in the electrical system, because it's not as bad as like chemical losses where like the splitting water, you're losing 0.86 volts either way. Or no, yeah, that's right, it's 0.8 whatever. Point is, like, in this specific scenario here, they're talking about major losses from using an electric motor, an electric generator. Unless you have things that are perfectly conductive, like superconductive, you're talking about pretty significant losses just due to the fact that metals have resistance. Even electrical grade copper is going to have enough of a resistance with the power densities that they're talking about using to significantly decrease the effectiveness of the system.
And not to mention mechanical wear on the parts. I mean, it is a
giant
crunch.
There's way too many moving parts in this thing.
Well, the mechanical wear is actually interesting. Same problem they have with this system is what they've been having in wind turbines, right? So what you get from wind industry is wind industry says you build a turbine and it lasts 25 years. Truth is that it's closer to 12 to 15 years, and the predominant reason is the bearings. So as soon
as a little bit of dust in there.
As soon as you start talking about trying to balance this load essentially out front, where all of your weight is supported on one component, you have these rubber bearings, and that helps you keep things to be proper and true.
Let me pause you for just a half second on that too, because the proposals on so many of these quote-unquote energy towers is to put them in the middle of deserts.
Well, here's a way to actually bring it back home for an average consumer grade person, just hanging out there with their home devices. Your car, the engine sits on mounts, your engine mounts. They break if you fuck with them too hard. Like, if you rev your engine a lot, you're going to break your engine mounts. So, basically, if you have a teenage kid, you're going to have broken engine mounts. So imagine with this thing that whenever you get good sun or you get good wind, you're stomping on the gas and you're revving your engine. And then when the wind stops and then you get demand, you stomp on the gas again because it's now going the other direction. Eventually, you're going to wear out these mounts. So any of the power components they're dealing with, the balancing on the base of the gantry, the part where they have to have tensioners to pull down hard to actually drive the inductor fly. Like, that's all that stuff is going to have moving parts. You can't get around or away from it. The best you could really do is try to like air dust the cable as it comes into the housing, like, because I'm assuming it's going to be an enclosed facility that actually houses the part that does power generation, and even that's not going to be sufficient to keep out enough dust to prevent this kind of major wear on the system. Wind turbines are doubly screwed because there's no way to like house a wind turbine and still get wind. You're not going to be able to prevent dust accumulation. With this system, you're going to generate dust from moving composite blocks around. You're talking about like moving concrete blocks. Like, they're going to scratch against each other. So regardless of whether or not it's going to be like an external facility, you're going to have all this dust generation on site anyway. And if you talk about wear and tear on the different parts of it, dust from the blocks is the thing. You're going to lose mass on these weights. Like, it's just going to become less effective over time unless you have significant upkeep. The kind of materials they're talking about using here are just not going to last.
So in other words, thanks, Steve.
It's not a good idea.
You're welcome. I am so glad to have participated in stupid ideas. Now, to be fair to myself, I told them it was a dumb idea, and they stopped hiring me. But I'm
Just imagine the grifting you could be doing right now. You could
Yeah.
still be
Kind
with
of the
these
thing.
guys.
that's kind of thing. I actually believe that engineering matters in the world, and in order to keep it mattering, we have to not lie about it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we devolve into the social studies and social sciences, where everything is racist, sexist, super
and you have to
bad
point
thing.
it all out.
Right. So I would rather sit there and suffer with integrity than grift with bullshit.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
All right. Well, I have to go here shortly. I think we're coming up on 3 hours anyway.
Well, about 2.5 since I've been here, but yeah, it's. I think we've had a pretty good time, and for anybody that's going to be listening to this in the very near future, be well and stay calm. The world is not as crazy as you might think. It's
Hashtag it gets better.
it does. I mean, and things aren't as hopeless as they might seem. So just keep your chin up and be well, stay well, and it's been a pleasure. Talk to you soon.
On the upside, I'm probably going to be looking for a job soon enough.
Hey,
Yeah.
Solyndra might be hiring again soon.
You know what? And maybe I can go there and get them to actually get a real result.
Maybe
Hey,
so.
maybe you can go to Cylindra and turn them into Cylindra Nuclear.
Possibly. All right. Well, it's been great. See you all again next week.